This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Michael O'Halloran by Jean Stratton-Porter. Chapter 17, Initiations in an Ancient and Honourable Brotherhood. You can busy yourself planning how to make our share of the world over so it will bring all the joy of life right to the front door. Peter. Now, Father, you said if I'd help till after harvest, I could go to Multiopolis and hunt a job, Junior reminded Peter. When may I? I remember, said Peter. You may start Monday morning if you want to. Ma and I have talked it over, and if you're bound to leave us, I guess there'd never be a better time. I can get Jud Jason to drive the cream wagon for me, and I'll do the best I can at the barn. I had hoped that we'd be partners and work together all our days, but if you have decided upon leaving us, of course you won't be satisfied till you've done it. Well, I can try, said Junior, and if I don't like it, I can come back. I don't know about that, objected Peter. Of course, I'd have other help hired. Your room would be occupied and your work contracted for. Well, I hadn't figured on that, he said. I supposed I could go and try it, and if I didn't like it, I could come home. Couldn't I come home, Ma? Nancy slowly became a greenish-white color. But the situation had been discussed so often it worried her dreadfully, and now that it had to be met, evasion would do no good. Peter grimly watched her. He knew she was struggling with a woman's inborn impulse to be the haven of her children, her son, her firstborn especially. He was surprised to hear her saying, Why, I hardly think so, Junior. It wouldn't be a right start in life. You must figure that whatever kind of work you find, or whoever you work for, there will be things you won't like or think fair. But if you are going to be your own man, you must begin like a man. And of course, a man doesn't go into business with his mind made up to run for his mother's petticoats, the first thing that displeases him. No, I guess if you go, you must start with your mind made up to stay till the October term of school opens anyway. Then we'll call that settled, said Peter. You may go with Mickey on the Monday morning car, and we probably won't see you again till you are one of the leading businessmen of Multiopolis, and drive out in your automobile. Have you decided which make you'll get? Well, from what I've learned driving yours, if I were buying one myself, I'd get a glide-by, said Junior. They strike me as the best car on the market. Peter glanced sharply at his son, and when he saw that the answer was perfectly sincere, his heart almost played him the trick he had expected from his wife. All right, Ma, gather up his clothes and get them washed, and have him ready, said Peter. I thought maybe you'd take me in the car and sort of look around with me, said Junior. I don't see how I'm going to do it with both our work piled on me, said Peter. And besides, I'm a farmer born and bred. I wouldn't have the first idea about how to get a boy a job in the city, or what he ought to do or have. Mickey is onto all that. He'll go with you, won't you, Mickey? Sure, said Mickey, and you can save a lot by using my room. It is high, but it's clean. Junior scowled, but Mickey proceeded calmly. And while it gets hot in the daytime, if you open the door at night and push the bed before the window, it soon cools off. In very hottest times, I always take to the fire escape. It's nice and cool there. Of course, that will be the ticket, said Peter heartily. A boy starting with everything to learn couldn't expect to earn much, and when you haven't Ma and me to depend on for your board, you'll be glad to have the bed free. Thank you, Mickey, that's fine. Junior did not look as if he thought it were, but he said nothing more on the subject, and presently asked, How much money ought I take to start on, Mickey? Holy gee, said Mickey. Why, you're fair in. You're going to make money, kid, not to spend it. If I was turned loose there with just 1 cent, I'd be flying by night, and if I hadn't the cent, I'd soon earn it. How could you, Mickey? Asked Junior eagerly. With or without? Queried Mickey. Both, exclaimed Junior. Well, without, said Mickey, I'd keep my lamps trimmed and burning, and I'd catch a lady falling off a car, or pick up a purse, or a kid, or run an errand. With, there'd be only one thing I'd think of, because papers are my game. I'd buy one for a penny and sell it for 2. Buy 2, sell for 4. You know the multiplication table, don't you? But of course you don't want a street job. You want it in a factory or a store. If you could do what you like best, what would it be, Junior?" Junior opened his mouth several times, and at last admitted he hadn't thought that far. "Why, I don't know." "Well," said Mickey calmly, "there's making things, that's factories. There's selling them, that's stores. There's doctors and lawyers, that's professional, like my boss. And there's office holders, like the men he is after. But of course you'd have to be old enough to vote and educated enough to do business, and have enough money earned at something else to buy your office. That's too far away. Now, if you don't like the street, there's the other 3. The quickest money would be in the first 2. If you was making things, what would you make?" "Automobiles," said Junior. "All right," said Mickey, "we can try them first." "If we can't find a factory that you'd like, what would you rather sell?" "Automobiles," said Junior promptly. "Gee," said Mickey, "I see where we hit that business at both ends. If we miss, what next?" "I don't know," said Junior. "Well, how am I going to know what to try for, if you don't even know what you want?" asked Mickey. "I'll make up my mind when I've looked around some," said Junior. "You can come closer deciding out here than you can in the rush of the streets," said Mickey. "There you'll be rustling for your supper, and you'll find boys hunting jobs thick as men at a ball game, and lots of them with dads to furnish their room and board." Junior hesitated. But Mickey excused himself, and without having been told what to do, he accomplished half a day's work for Mrs. Harding, then began some of Peter's jobs, and afterward turned his attention to hearing Peach's lessons and setting her new copy. When Junior paid his fare Monday morning, Mickey, judging by the change he exhibited, realized that both his mother and father had given him, to start on, $1 to spend. Mickey would have preferred that he be penniless. He decided, as they ran cityward, that the first thing was to part Junior from his money, so he told him he would be compelled to work in the forenoon and for a while in the afternoon, and left him to his own devices on the street, with a meeting place agreed on at noon. When Mickey reached the spot, he found Junior with a pocket full of candy, eating early peaches, and instead of hunting work, he had attended 3 picture shows. Mickey could have figured to within 10 cents of what was left of one of Junior's dollars. But as the cure did not really begin until the money disappeared, the quicker it went, the better. As he ate his sandwich and drank his milk, he watched Junior making a dinner of meat, potatoes, pie, and ice cream, and made a mental estimate of the remains of the other $1. As a basis for a later "I told you so," he remonstrated and pointed out the fact that there were hundreds of unemployed men of strength, skilled artisans with families to support, looking for work that minute. "I know your dad signed up that contract with Judge Jason," he said, "'cause I saw him, and that means that he's got no use for you for 3 months, so you must take care of yourself for that long at least, if you've got any ginger in you." "Of course," explained Mickey. "I know that most city men think country boys won't stick, and are big cowards, but I'm expecting you to show them just where they're mistaken. I know you're not lazy. I know you got as much sand and grit as any city boy, but you must prove it to the rest of them. You must show up." "Sure," said Junior, "I'll convince 'em." By night, the last penny of the second $1 was gone, so Junior borrowed his fare to his room from Mickey, who was to remain with him to show him the way back and forth, and to spend an early hour in search of employment. It was Mickey's first night away from Peaches, and while he knew she was safe, he felt that when night came she would miss him, and the thought that she might cry for him tormented him to speech. He pointed out to Junior very clearly that he would have to mark corners and keep his eyes open, because he need not expect that he could leave her longer than that. Junior agreed with him, for he had promised Peaches in saying good-bye to keep Mickey only 1 night. He had understood by her wavering voice and evident anxiety that with darkness Mickey was expected and essential to her comfort. He had treated himself to candy and unusual fruits until his money was gone, and by night these and a walk of miles on hot pavement had bred such an appetite that he felt he had not eaten a full meal in years. So when Mickey brought out the remains of the food Mrs. Harding had given him, her son felt insulted. But Mickey figured a day on the basis of what he had earned, what he had expended, what he must save to be ready when the great surgeon came, and prepared exactly as he would have done for himself and Peaches. On reaching the tenement and climbing until his legs ached, Junior faced stifling heat. But Mickey opened the window and started a draft by setting the door wide. While they ate supper, Mickey talked unceasingly, but Junior was sulkily silent. He tried the fire escape, but one glance from the rickety affair, hung a mile above the ground it seemed to him, was enough, and he climbed back in the window and tossed on the bed. Junior did his first real thinking that night. He was ravenous before morning and aghast at what he was offered for breakfast. He was eager to find work, and he knew for what his first day's wage would go. In justice to his own sense of honor and in justice to Junior, mere common fairness, such as he would have wanted in like case, for the first few days Mickey honestly and unceasingly hunted for employment. With Junior at his elbow, he suffered one rebuff after another, until it was clear to him that it was impossible for a country boy, unused to the ways of the city, to find or to hold a job at which he could survive, even with his room provided, while the city swarmed with unemployed men. Everywhere they found the work they would have liked done by an Italian, Greek, Swede, German, or Polander, who seemed strong as oxen, oblivious, as no doubt they were, to treatment Junior never had seen accorded a balky mule, and able to live on a chunk of black bread, a bit of cheese, and a few cents' worth of stale beer. When Mickey had truly convinced himself of what he had believed, with a free conscience, he then began allowing Junior to find out for himself exactly what he was facing. By that time Junior had lost himself on the way to Mickey's rooms, spent a night wandering the streets, and, breakfastless, was waiting before the Iroquois. Mickey listened sympathetically, supplied a dime, which seemed to be all he had, for breakfast, and said as he entered the building, "Well, kid, till we can find a job you'll just have to go up against the street. If I can live and save money at it, you ought to be smart enough to live. Go to it till I get my day's work done. You just can't go home, because they'll think you don't amount to anything, and the fellows will make game of you. And besides, Jud is doing wonderfully well, your father said so. He seems so tickled over him. I guess the fact is, he is getting more help from him than he ever did from Junior boy, so your job there isn't open. Go at whatever you can see that needs to be done, till I get my work over and we'll try again. I'll be out about 3, and you can meet me here." Empty and disheartened, Junior squeezed the dime and hurried toward the nearest restaurant. But the transaction had been witnessed by a boy as hungry as he and hardened to the street. How Junior came to be sprawling on the sidewalk he never knew, only that his hand involuntarily opened in falling as he threw it out to catch himself, so he couldn't find the dime. Before noon he was sick and reeling with sleeplessness and hunger. He was waiting when it was Mickey's time to lunch, but he did not come, and in desperation Junior really tried the street. At last he achieved a nickel by snatching a dropped bundle from under a car. He sat a long time in a stairway looking at it, and then, having reached a stage where he was more sick and less hungry, he hunted a telephone booth and tried to get his home, only to learn that the family was away. Gladdened by the thought that they might be in the city, he walked miles, watching the curb before stores where they shopped, searching for their car, and he told himself that if he found it, nothing could separate him from the steering gear until he sped past all regulation straight to his mother's cupboard. He had wanted ham and chicken in the beginning. Later, helping himself to cold food in the cellar seemed a luxury. Then crackers and cookies in the dining room cupboard would have satisfied his wildest desire. And before 3 o'clock, Junior, in mad rebellion, remembered his mother's slop bucket. How did she dare put big pieces of bread and things good enough for anyone to eat in feed for pigs and poultry? If he had ever reached home, he resolved he would put a stop to that. And if he ever got back from the hurry and bustle of the streets to the quiet of the highway and the delectable autocracy of the cream wagon, where half the neighbors handed him cookies and donuts and hot bread heels spread with clover butter and honey, he would never again leave it. He began watching the people to see if he really were the only hungry one in the crowds, and in his study for signs of poverty he suddenly became shocked and amazed to see the same evidence of suffering, unrest, and mental hunger on the faces of people whose manner of dress and mode of travel indicated wealth. At 3, to Mickey's cheerful, "Now we'll find a job or make it," he answered. "No, we will find a square meal or steal it," and then he told. Mickey watched him reflectively, but as he figured the case, it was not for him to suggest retreat. He condoled, paid for the meal, and started hunting work again, with Junior silent and dogged beside him. To the surprise of both, almost at once they found a place for a week with a florist. Junior went to work. After a few tasks bunglingly performed, he was tried on messenger service and started with his car fare to deliver a box containing a funeral piece. He had no idea where he was to go or what car line to take. In his extremity, a bootblack came to his aid. He safely delivered the box at a residence where the owner was leaving his door for his car. He gave Junior $50 and went his way. Junior met the first friendly greeting he had encountered in Multiopolis as he reached the street. 2 boys larger than he walked beside him and talked so frankly that before he reached his car line, he felt he had made friends. They offered to show him a shorter cut to the car line just by going up an alley and out on a side street. At the proper place for seclusion, the one behind knocked him senseless, the one before wheeled and relieved him of money, and both fled. Junior lay for a time, then slowly came back, but he was weak and ill. He knew without investigating what had happened, and preferring the mercy that might be inside to that of the alley, he crawled into a back door. It proved to be a morgue. A workman came to his assistance, felt the lump on his head, noticed the sickness on his face, and gave him a place to rest. Junior was dubious from the start about feeling better as he watched the surroundings. The proprietor came past and inquired who he was and why he was there. Junior told him and showed the lumps behind his ear and on his forehead to prove his words. The man was human. He gave Junior another nickel and told him which car to take from his front door. He had to stand aside and see 5 pieces of charred humanity from a cleaning establishment explosion carried through the door before he had a chance to leave it. He reached the florist's 2 hours late, and in spite of his story and his perfectly discernible bumps to prove it, he was discharged as a fool for following strangers into an alley. On the streets once more, and penniless, he started to walk the miles to his room. When he found the building, he thought it would be cooler to climb the fire escape and sit on it until he decided what to do. Then he could open the door from the inside. At the top, he thrust a foot, head, and shoulders into the room and realized he had selected the wrong escape. He tried to draw back, but 2 men leaped for him, and as he was doubled in the window, he could not make a swift movement. He was landed in the middle of the room, cursed for a prowling thief, his protestations silenced, his pockets searched, and when they yielded nothing, his body stripped of its clean, wholesome clothing, and he was pitched down the stairs. He appealed to several people and found that the less he said, the safer he was. He snatched a towel from a basket of clothes before a door, twisted it around him, and ran down the streets to Mickey's front entrance. With all his remaining breath, he sped up flight after flight of stairs and at last reached the locked door, only to find that the key was in the pocket of his stolen trousers, and he could not force his way with his bare hands. He could only get to his clothing by trying the fire escapes again. He was almost too sick to see or cling to the narrow iron steps, but that time he counted carefully and looked until he was sure before he entered. He found his clothes and in the intense heat dressed himself, but he could not open the door. He sat on the fire escape to think. Presently he espied one of the men who had robbed him watching him from another escape, and being afraid and beaten sore, he crept into the heat and lay on the bed beside the window. After a while a breath of air came in, and Junior slept the sleep of exhaustion. When he awoke it was morning, his head aching, his mouth dry, and the room cooler. Glancing toward the door, he saw it standing open, and then noticed the disorder of the room and of himself, and sat up to find he was on the floor once more, disrobed, and the place stripped of every portable thing in it, even the bed, little stove, and the trunk filled with clothes and a few personal possessions sacred to Mickey because they had been his mother's. The men had used the key in Junior's pocket to enter while he slept, drugged him, and carried away everything. He crept to the door and closed it, then sank on the floor and cried until he again became unconscious. It was 4:00 that afternoon when Mickey looked in and understood the situation. He bent over Junior's bruised and battered body, stared at his swollen, tear-stained face, and darting from the room brought water and then food and clothing. Redressed and fed, Junior lay on the floor and said to Mickey, "Go to the nearest phone and call Father. Tell him I'm sick, to come in a hurry with the car." "Sure," said Mickey, "but hadn't we better wait till morning now, and get you rested and fed up a little?" "No," said Junior. "The sooner he sees the fix I'm in, the better, and he will realize that I'm not a quitter. But this ain't just the place for me. Mickey, did you ever go through this? Why do I get it so awful hard?" "It's because the regulars can tell a mile off you're a country, Junior," said Mickey. "All my life I've been on the streets, and they knew me for city born, and supposed I'd friends to trace them and back me if they abused me. And then I always look ahead sharp and don't trust a living soul about alleys. You say the next escape but one? I've got to find them and get back my things. I want mother's, and Lily and I can't live this winter with no bed, and no stove, and nothing at all." "I'm sorry about your mother's things, Mickey. Don't worry over the rest," said Junior. "Pa and Ma won't ever be willing to give up Peaches again. I can see that right now. And if they keep her, they will have to take you too, because of course you can't be separated from her. Your goods I'll pay back. I owe you a lot as it is, but I got some money in the bank, and I'll have to sell my sheep." Junior laid his head on his arm and sobbed weakly. "Don't, Junior," said Mickey. "I feel just awful about this. I thought you had a place that would earn your supper, and you had the room, and would be all right." "Why, of course," said Junior. Mickey looked intently at him. "Now look here, Junior," he said, "I got to square myself on this. I didn't think all the time you'd like Multiopolis when you saw it with the bark off. Course, viewing it on a full stomach from an automobile with spending money in your pocket, and a smooth run to a good home before you, is one thing. Facing up to it and asking it to hand out those things to you in return for work you can do here, without knowing the ropes, is another. You've stuck it out longer than I would, honest you have, but it isn't your game, and you don't know how, and you'd be a fool to learn. I thought you'd get enough to satisfy you when you came, but seeing for yourself seemed to be the only way to cure you." "Oh, don't start the 'I told you so,'" said Junior. "Father and mother will hand it out for the rest of my life. I'd as lief die as to go back. But I'm going, not because I can't get in the game and make a living if you can, even if I have to go out and start as you did with a penny. I'm going back, but not for the reason you think. It's because seen at close range, Multiopolis ain't what it looks like from an automobile. I know something that I really know, and that comes natural to me. That beats it a mile. And now I've had my chance and made my choice. I'm so sore I can't walk. But if you'll just call Father and tell him to come in on high, I'll settle with you later." "Course, if that's the way you feel, I'll call him," said Mickey. "But Junior, let me finish this much I was trying to say. I knew Multiopolis would do to you all it had done to me, and I knew you wouldn't like it. But I didn't figure on your big frame and fresh face spelling country till it would show a mile down the street. I didn't figure on you not getting the show I would, and I didn't intend anything worse should happen to you than has to me. Honest, I didn't. I'm just about sick over this, Junior, Don't you want to go to Mr. Bruce's office? I got a key, and he won't care. Don't you want to go there and rest a little and feed up better before I call your father?" "No, I don't. I got enough, and I know it. They must know it sometime. It might as well come at once." "Then let's go out on the car," said Mickey. "I guess you don't realize just how bad this is," said Junior. "You call father, and call him quick and emphatic enough to bring him." "All right then," said Mickey. "Here goes." "And put the call in nearest place you can find, and hustle back," said Junior. "I'm done with alleys and sluggers and robbers. Goliath couldn't have held his own against 2 big men when he was 15, and I guess father won't think I'm a coward because they got away with me. But you hurry." "Sure, I'll fly, and I'll get him if I can." "There's no doubt about getting him. This is baked potato, bacon, blackberry roll, honey, and bread time at our house. They wouldn't be away just now, and it's strange that they have been so much this week." Mickey gave Junior a swift glance and raced to the nearest telephone. "You, Mickey?" queried Peter. "Yes, it's you for SOS, and I'm telling you to come on high and lose no time in starting." "Am I to come, Mickey, or am I too busy?" "You're to come, Peter, to my room, and in a hurry. Things didn't work according to program." "Why, what's the matter, Mickey?" "Just what I told you would be when it came to getting a job here. But I didn't figure on street sharks picking on Junior and robbing him, and following him to my room and cleaning out every scrap of his and mine and mother's, and slugging him till he can't walk. You come, Peter, and come in a hurry." "And Peter?" "You better let me start," said Peter. "Yes, but Peter, 1 minute," insisted Mickey. "I got something to say to you. This didn't work out as I planned, and I'm awful sorry, and you'll be too. But Junior is cured done enough to suit you. He won't ever want to leave you again, and you can bank on that. And he ain't hurt permanent. But if you got anything in your system that sounds even a little bit like an 'I told you so,' forget it on the way in, and leave instructions with the family to do the same. See? Junior's awful sore. He don't need anything rubbed in the way of reminiscences. He's ready to do the talking. See?" "Yes. You sure he ain't really hurt?" "Sure," said Mickey. 3 days will fix him. But Peter, it's been mighty rough. Go easy, will you?" "Mickey, have you got money?" "All we need. Just you get here with the car, and put in a comfort and a pillow. All my stuff's gone." Peter Senior arrived in a surprisingly short time, knelt on the floor, and looked closely at his sleeping boy. "Naked and beaten to insensibility, you say?" he breathed. Mickey nodded. "Nothing to eat for nearly 2 days?" Another affirmation. Peter arose, pushed back his hat, and wiped the sweat from his brow. "I haven't been thinking about anything but him ever since he left," he said. "And what makes me the sorest is that the longer I think of it, the surer I get that this is my fault. I didn't raise him right." "Aw, Peter!" protested Mickey. "I've got it all studied out," said Peter, "and I didn't. There have been 2 mistakes, Junior's and mine, and of the 2, mine is twice as big as the boy's." Peter stooped and picked up his son, who stirred and awakened. When he found himself in his father's arms, Junior clung to him and whispered over and over, "Father, dear father." Peter gripped him with all his might and whispered back, "Forgive me, son, forgive me." "Well, I don't know what for," sobbed Junior. "You will before long," said Peter. He drove to a cool place and let the car stand while he called his wife, and explained all of the situation he saw fit. She was waiting at the gate when they came. She never said a word except to urge Junior to sit up to the table and eat his supper. But Junior had no appetite. "I want to run things here for a few minutes," he said. "When the children finish, put them to bed, and then let me tell you, and you can decide what you'll do to me." "Well, don't you worry about that," said Peter. "No, I won't," said Junior, "because there's nothing you can do that will be half I deserve." When the little folks were asleep, and Mickey had helped Mrs. Harding finish the work, and Jud Jason had been paid $5 for his contract and had gone home, Junior lay in the hammock on the front porch, while his father, mother, and Mickey sat close. When he started to speak, Peter said, "Now, Junior, wait a minute. You've been gone a week, and during that time I've used my brain more than I ever did in a like period, even when I was courting your ma, and the subject I labored on was what took you away from us. I've found out why you were not satisfied and what made you dissatisfied. The guilty party is Peter Harding, aided and abetted by one Nancy Harding, otherwise known as Ma." "Why, father!" interrupted Junior. "Silence!" said Peter. "I've just found out that it's a man's job to be the head of his family, and I'm going to be the head of mine after this, and like Mickey here, I'm going to keep it. Let me finish. I spent this week thinking, and all the things I have thought would make a bigger book than the dictionary if it were set down. Why should you ask to be forgiven for a desire to go to Multiopolis, when I carried you there as a baby, led you as a toddler, and went with you every chance I could trump up as a man? Who bought and fed you painted, adulterated candy as a child, when your ma should have made you pure, clean taffy at home from our maple syrup, or as good as sugar as we could buy? Often I've spent money that now should be on interest for fruit that looked fine to you there, and proved to be grainy, too mellow, sour, or not half so good as what you had at home. I never took you hunting or fishing, or camping, or swimming in your life, and I haven't had a mite of trouble to find time and money to take you to circuses, which I don't regret, I'll do again, and picture shows, which I'll do also, and other shows. I'm not condemning any form of amusement we have ever patronized so much, so we'll probably do all of it again. But what gets me now is how I ever came to think that the only interesting things, and those worth taking time and spending money on, were running to Multiopolis, to eat, to laugh, to look, and getting little to show for it, but disappointment and suffering for all of us. You haven't had the only punishment that struck the Harding family this week, Junior. Your ma and I have had our share, and I haven't asked her if she has got enough, but speaking strictly for myself, I have." "I wouldn't live through it again for the farm," sobbed Mrs. Harding. "I see what you're getting at, Pa, and it's we who are the guilty parties, just as you say." Junior sat up and stared at them. "I don't so much regret the things I did," said Peter, "as I condemn myself for the things I haven't done. I haven't taught you to ride so you don't look a spectacle on a horse, and yet horses should come as natural as breathing to you. You should be a skilled marksman, and you couldn't hit a wash tub at 10 paces. You should swim like a fish, with 100 lakes in your county. You'd drown if you were thrown in the middle of one and left to yourself. You ought to be able to row a boat as well as it can be done, and cast a line with all the skill any lad of your age possesses. That you can't even make a fair showing at any sport results from the fact that every time your father had a minute to spare, he took you and headed straight for Multiopolis. Here's the golf links at our door, and if ever any game was a farmer's game, and if any man has a right to hold up his head and tramp on his own hills, and swing a strong arm and a free one, and make a masterly stroke, it's a landowner. There's no reason why plowing and tilling should dull the brains, bend the back, or make a pack horse of a man. Modern methods show you how to do the same thing a better way, how to work one machine instead of 10 men, how to have time for a vacation, just as city men do, and how to have money for books and music and school instead of loading with so much land it's a burden to pay the taxes. I have quite a bunch of land for sale, and I see a way open to make 3 times the money I ever did with half the hard work. We've turned over a new leaf at this place from start to finish, including the house, barn, land, and family. A year from now you won't know any of us, but that later. Just now it's this. I'm pointing out to you, Junior, exactly how you came to have your hankering for Multiopolis. I can see how you followed the way we set you thinking, that all the amusing things were there, the smart people, the fine clothes, the wealth, and the freedom. Yes, you ought to see the amusing things and the happy people when your stomach's cramping and your head splitting," cried Junior. "I tell you, down among them it looks different from riding past in an automobile." "Exactly," conceded Peter. "Exactly what I'm coming at. All your life I've given you the wrong viewpoint. Now you can busy yourself planning how to make our share of the world over, so it'll bring all the joy of life right to the front door. I guess the first big thing is to currycomb the whole place, and fix it as it should be to be the most convenient for us. Then we better take a course of training in making up our minds to be satisfied with what we can afford. Junior, does home look better to you now than it did this time last week?" "Father," began Junior, and sobbed aloud. "The answer is sufficient," said Peter dryly. "Never mind, son. When with our heads put together we get our buildings and land fixed right, I suggest that we also fix our clothes and our belongings right. I can't see any reason why a woman as lovely as Ma should be told from any other pretty woman by her walk or dress. I don't know why a man as well set up as I am shouldn't wear his clothes as easy as the men at the clubhouse. I can't see why we shouldn't be at that same clubhouse for a meal once in a while, just to keep us satisfied with home cooking. And that game looks interesting. Next trip to Multiopolis I make, I'm going to get saddles for Junior and Mickey and teach them what I know about how to sit and handle a horse properly, and it needn't be a plow horse either. Next day off I'm going to spend hauling lumber to one of these lakes we decide on, to build a house for a launch and a fishing boat for us. Then when we have a vacation, we'll drive there, shelter our car, and enjoy ourselves like the city folks by the thousand, since we think what they do so right and fine. They've showed us what they like, flocking 5,000 at a clip to Red Wing Lake a few miles from us. Since we live among them, what they are spending their thousands every summer to enjoy, let's help ourselves to a little pleasure. I'm going to buy each of us a fishing rod and get a box of tackle soon as I reach it, and I'm going fast. I've wasted 16 years, now I'm on the home stretch, and it's going to be a stretch of all there is in me to make our home the sweetest, grandest place on earth to us. Will you help me, Nancy? I think maybe I'll be saved nervous prostration if I can help just a few of these things take place." "Yes, I've sensed that," said Peter. "Mickey pointed that out to me the morning you jumped your job and headed for sunup. For years, just half your time and strength have been thrown away using old methods and implements in your work, and having the kitchen unhandy and inconvenient, and I'm the man who should have seen it, and got you right tools for your job at the same time I bought a house for myself and my work. We must stir up this whole neighborhood and build a big entertainment house where we can have a library suitable for country folks and satisfying to their ways of life. It's got to have music boxes in it, and a floor fit for dancing and skating, and a stage for our own entertainments, and the folks we decide to bring here to amuse us. We can put in a picture machine and a screen that we can pay for by charging a few cents admission the nights we run it, and rent films once or twice a week from a good city show. We could fix up a place like that and get no end of fun and education out of it, without going 30 miles and spending enough money in one night to get better entertainment for a month at home, and in a cool, comfortable hall, and where we can go from it to bed in a few minutes. Once I am started, with Mickey and Junior to help me, I'm going to call a meeting and talk these things over with my neighbors, and get them to join in if I can. If I can't, I'll go on and put up the building and start things as they should be, and charge enough admittance to get back what I invest, and after that, just enough to pay running expenses for the talent we use. I'm so sure it can be done, I'm going to do it. Will you help me, son?" "Yes, father, I'd think it was fine to help to do that," said Junior. "Now may I say what I want to?" "Why, yes, you might, son," said Peter. "But to tell the truth, I can't see that you have anything to say. If you have got the idea, Junior, that you have wronged us any, and that it's your job to ask us to forgive you for wanting to try things we started and kept you hankering after all your life so far, why, you're mistaken. If I'd trained you from your cradle to love your home as I've trained you to love Multiopolis, you never would have left us. So if there is forgiving in the air, you please forgive me. And this includes your ma as well. I should ask her forgiveness too for a whole lot of things that I bungled about, when I thought I was loving her all I possibly could. I've got a new idea of love so big and all-encompassing, it includes a fireless cooker and a dishwashing machine. I'm going to put it into practice for a year, that if my family wants to change back, we'll talk about it. But Father, began Junior. Go to bed, son, said Peter. You can tell us what happened when you ain't as sleepy as you are right now. Junior arose and followed his mother to the kitchen. Ain't he going to let me tell what a fool I've been at all? He demanded. I guess your pa felt that when he got through telling what fools we've been, there wasn't anything left for you to say. I know I feel that way. This neighborhood does all in its power from the day their children are born to teach them that home is only a stopping place to eat and sleep and work and be sick in, and that every desirable thing in life is to be found somewhere else, the else being, in most cases, Multiopolis. Just look at it year after year, gobbling up our boys and girls, and think over the ones you know who have gone, and see what they've come to. Among the men, as far as I remember, Joel Harris went into a law office and made a rich, respectable man, and 2 girls married and have good homes. The others, many of them, I couldn't name to you the places they are in. This neighborhood needs reforming, and if Pa has set out to attempt it, I'll lend a hand. And I guess from what you got this week, you'll be in a position to help better than you could have helped before. Yes, I guess so too, said Junior emphatically. He gladly went back to the cream wagon. Peter didn't want him to, but there was a change in Junior. He was no longer a willful, discontented boy. He was a partner who was greatly interested in a business and felt dissatisfied if he were not working at furthering it. He had little to say, and his eyes were looking far ahead in deep thought. The first morning he started out. While Junior unhitched his horse, Peter filled the wagon and went back to the barn where Mickey was helping him. Junior, passing, remembered he had promised Jud Jason to bring a bundle he had left there, and stopped for it. He stepped into the small front door and bent for the package, lying in sight, when clearly and distinctly arose Mickey's voice, lifted to reach Peter at another task. "Course I meant him to get enough to make him good and sick of it, like we agreed on, but I never intended him to get any such dose as he had." Junior straightened swiftly, an astonished look crossing his face, and his lower jaw dropped. His father's reply was equally audible. "Of course I understand that, Mickey." "Surest thing you know," said Mickey. "I like Junior. I like him better than any other boy I ever knew, and I've known hundreds. And I tell you, Peter, he was gamer than you'll ever believe to hang on as long as he did." "Yes, I think that too," said Peter. "You know, he didn't come because he was all in," explained Mickey. "You can take a lot of pride in that. He'd about been the limit when he quit. And he quit not because he was robbed and knocked out, but because what he had seen showed him that Multiopolis wasn't the job he wanted for a life sentence. See?" "I hope you are right about that," said Peter. "I'm glad to my soul to get him home, cured in any way, but it sort of gags me to think of him as having been scared out. It salves my vanity considerable to feel, as you say, that he had the brains to sense the situation and quit because he felt it wasn't the work for which he was born." Then Mickey's voice came eagerly, earnestly, warming the cockles of Junior's heart. "Now let me tell you, Peter, I was there, and I know. It was that way. It was just that way exact. He wasn't scared out. He'd have gone at it again, all right, if he'd seen anything in it he wanted. It was just as his mother felt when she talked it over with me, and the same with you later, that if he got to the city and got right up against earning a living there, he would find it wasn't what he wanted, and he did, like all of us thought. Course I meant to put it to him stiff. I meant to initiate him in the ancient and honorable 3rd degree of Multiopolis, all right, so he'd have enough to last a lifetime, but I only meant to put him up against what I'd had myself on the streets. I was just going to test his ginger. I wasn't counting on the robbing, and the alleys, and the knockout, and the morgue. Gee, Peter!" Then they laughed. A dull red surged up Junior's neck and flooded his face. He picked up the bundle, went silently from the barn, and climbed on the wagon. The jerk of the horse stopping at its accustomed place told him where to load the first can. He had been thinking so deeply he was utterly oblivious to everything save the thought that it had been prearranged among them to cure him. Even his mother knew about it, if he heard aright, had been the instigator of the scheme to let him go, to be what Mickey called initiated in the ancient and honorable 3rd degree of Multiopolis. Once he felt so outraged he thought of starting the horse home, taking the trolley, going back to Multiopolis, and fighting his way to what his father would be compelled to acknowledge success. He knew that he could do it. He was on the point of vowing that he would do it. But in his heart he knew better than in anyone else how repulsed he was, how he hated it. And against a vision of weary years of fighting came that other vision of himself, planning and working beside his father to change and improve their home life. "Say, Junior, are you asleep?" called Jud Jason. "You sit there like you couldn't move. Did you bring my bundle?" "Yes, it's back there," answered Junior. "Get it." "How'd you like Multiopolis?" asked Jud. Junior knew he had that to face. "It's a cold-blooded sell, Jud," he said promptly. "I'm glad I went when I did, and found out for myself. You see, it's like this, Jud. I could have stayed and made my way, but I found out in a few days that I wouldn't give a snap for the way when it was made. We fellows are better off right where we are, and a lot of us are ready to throw away exactly what many of the men in Multiopolis are wild to get. Now let me tell you." Junior told him, and through putting his experience into words, he eased his heart and cleared his brain. He came to hints of great and wonder-working things that were going to happen soon. There was just a possibility that Jud gleaned an idea that the experience in Multiopolis had brought his friend home to astound and benefit the neighborhood. At any rate, Junior picked up the lines with all the sourness gone from his temperament, which was usually sweet, except that one phrase of Mickey's and the laughter. Suddenly he leaned forward. "Jud, come here," he said. Junior began to speak, and Jud began to understand and sympathize with the boy he had known from childhood. "Could we?" asked Junior. "Could we? Well, I just guess we could!" "When?" queried Junior. "This afternoon, if he's going to be off," said Jud. "Well, I don't know what his plans are, but I could telephone from here, and by rustling I could get back by 2. I've done it on a bet." "Where will we go, and what for?" "To Atwater. Fishing is good enough excuse." "All right. Father will let me take the car." "Hayseed! Isn't walking good enough to suit you? What's the matter with the Elkhart Swale, Atwater Marsh, and the woods around the head of the lake?" "Hold the horse till I run in and phone him." When he came down the walk, he reported, "He wants to go fishing awful bad, and he'll be ready by 2. That's all settled then. We'll have a fine time." "Bully," said Jud laconically, and started to the house of another friend, where a few words secured a boy of his age a holiday. Junior drove fast as he dared and hurried with his work, so he reached home a little before 2, where he found Mickey with poles and a big can of worms ready. Despite the pressing offer of the car, they walked, in order to show Mickey the country, which he was eager to explore on foot. Junior said the sunfish were big as lunch plates at Atwater, the perch fine, and often, if you caught a grasshopper or a cricket for bait, you got a big bass around the shore, and if they had the luck to reach the lake when there was no one ahead of them, and secured a boat, they were sure of taking some. "Wouldn't I like to see Lily eating a fish I caught," said Mickey, searching the grass and kicking rotting wood as he saw Junior doing to find bass bait. "Minis are the real thing," explained Junior. "When we get the scheme father laid out going, before we start fishing, you and I will take a net and come to this creek and catch a bucketful of right bait, and then we'll have man's sport for sure. Won't it be great?" "Exactly what the plutes are doing," said Mickey. "Gee, Junior, if your pa does all the things he said he was going to, you'll be a plute yourself. "Never heard him say anything in my life he didn't do," said Junior. "And didn't you notice that he put you in, too? You'll be just as much of a plute as I will." "Not on your bromide," said Mickey. "He is your father, and he'll give you part of his money, and you'll be in business with him. I'll just be along sometimes, as a friend, maybe. I usually take father at just what he says. I guess he means you to stay in our family, if you like." "I wonder now," said Mickey. "Looks like it to me. Father and mother both like you, and they're daffy about Peaches. They never made half as much fuss over any of us. It's because she's so little, and so white and so helpless," Mickey hastened to explain, "and so awful sweet." "Well, for whatever it is, said Junior, "and I'm just as crazy about her as the rest. Look out, kid! That fellow's coming right at us." Junior dashed for the fence, while Mickey lost time in turning to see what "that fellow" might be. So he faced the ram that had practised on Malcolm Minturn. With lowered head, the ram sprang at Mickey. He flew in air, and it butted space, and whirled again, so that before the boy's breath was fully recovered, he lifted once more with all the agility learned on the streets of Multiopolis. But that time the broad straw hat he wore to protect his eyes on the water sailed from his head. He dropped the poles, and as the ram came back at him, he hit it squarely in the face with the bait can, which angered rather than daunted it. Then for a few minutes Mickey was too busy to know exactly what happened, and movements were too quick for Junior. When he saw that Mickey was tiring and that the ram was not, he caught a rail from the fence and helped subdue the ram. Panting, they climbed the fence and sat resting. "Why, I didn't know Higgins had that ram," said Junior. "We fellows always crossed that field before. Say, there ain't much in that 'Gentle sheep, pray tell me why in the pleasant fields you lie?' business, is there?" "Not much but the lie," said Mickey earnestly. Junior dropped from the fence and led the way toward a thick wood thick with underbrush, laughing until his heart pained. As they proceeded they heard voices. "Why, that sounds like my bunch," said Junior. He whistled shrilly, which brought an immediate response, so near at hand as to be startling, and soon 2 boys appeared. "Hello," said Junior. "Hello," they answered. "Where are you going?" asked Junior. "To Atwater Lake, fishing. Where are you?" "There too," said Junior. "Why, great! We'll go together. Sam, this is Mickey." Mickey offered his hand, and formalities were over. "But I threw our worms at the ram," said Mickey. "Well, that was a neat trick!" cried Junior. "Wasn't it?" agreed Mickey. "But you see, the ram was coming, and I had the worms in my strong right, and I didn't stop to think I'd spent an hour digging 'em. I just whaled away." "Never mind the worms," said Jud. "I guess we got enough to divide. If you fellows want to furnish something for your share, you can find some grubs in these woods, and we'll get more chance at the bass." "Sure," said Mickey. "What are grubs, and where do you look for them?" "Oh, anywhere, under rotting wood and round old logs," said Jud. "Believe it's a good place right here, Mickey. Dig in till I cut a stick to help with." Mickey pushed aside the bushes, dropped on his knees, and dug in. A second later, with a wild shriek, he rolled over and over, striking and screaming. "Yellow Jackets!" shouted Jud. "Quick, fellers, help Mickey! He's got too close a nest." Armed with branches, they came beating the air and him, until Mickey had a fleeting thought that if the red-hot needles piercing him did not kill, the boys would. Presently he found himself a mud hole, and as the others ouched and oh'd and bewailed their fate, and grabbed mud and plastered it on, he did the same. Jud generously offered, as he had not so many stings, to help Mickey. Soon even the adoring eyes of Peaches could not have told her idol from the mud hole. He twisted away from an approaching handful, crying, "Gee, Jud, leave a feller room to breathe. If you're going to smother me, I might as well die from bites." "Bites?" cried the boys, and all of them laughed wildly, so wildly that Mickey flushed with shame to think he had so little appreciation of the fun calling a sting a bite when it was explained to him. "Well, they sure do get down to business," he chattered, chilling from the exquisite pain of a dozen yellow jacket stings, one of which, on his left eyelid, was rapidly closing that important organ. He bowed a willing head for Judd's application of cold mud. Finally they gathered up their poles and bait and again started toward the lake. The day was warm, and there was little air in the marsh, and on the swampy shore they followed. Suddenly Judd cried, "I tell you, fellows, what's the use of walking all the way around the lake? Bet the boats will be taken when we get there. Let's cut fishing and go swimming right here where there's a cool, shady place. It will be good for you, Mickey. It will cool off your stings a lot." Mickey promptly began to unbutton, and the others did the same. They made their way through the swamp tangle lining the shore at the head of the lake, and tried to reach the water beside the tamaracks. Sam and Junior found solid footing and waded toward deep water. Judd piloted Mickey to a spot he thought sufficiently treacherous and said, "Looks good here. You go ahead, Mickey, and I'll come after you." Mickey was unaccustomed to the water. He waded in with the assurance he had seen the others use, but suddenly he cried, "Gee, boys, I'm sucking right down!" Then on his ears fell a deafening clamor, "Help! Help! Quicksands! Mickey's sinking! Help him!" Mickey threw out his arms. He grabbed wildly, and a force, seemingly gentle but irresistible, sucked him lower and lower, and with each inch it bore him down, gripped tighter and pulled faster. When he glanced at the boys he saw panic in their faces, and he realized that he was probably lost, and they were terror-stricken. The first gulp of tepid shore water that strangled him in running across his gasping lips made him think of Peaches. Struggling, he threw back his head and so saw a wide-spreading branch of a big maple not far above him. All that was left of Mickey went into the cry, "Junior, bend me that branch!" Junior swiftly climbed the tree, crept on the limb, and swayed it till it swept the water, and Mickey laid hold, just a few twigs, and then as Junior backed and the branch lifted higher and higher, Mickey worked hand over hand, and finally grasped twigs that promised to stand a gentle pull. Then Judd began to shout instructions. "Little lower, Junior. Get a better grip before you pull hard, Mickey. Maple's brittle. Easy. It'll snap on you. Kind of roll yourself and turn to let the water in and loosen the sand. Go easy or you're dead and buried at the same time. Now roll again. Now pull a little. You're making it. You're out to your shoulders. Back further, Junior. Don't you fall in or you'll both go down." Mickey was very quiet now. His small face was pallid with the terror of leaving Peaches forever with no provision for her safety. The grip of the sucking sand was yet pulling at his legs and body, and if the branch broke, he knew what it meant. That sucking, insistent pulling and caving away beneath his feet told him. Suddenly Mickey gave up struggling, set his teeth, and began fighting by instinct. He moved his shoulders gently until he let the water flow in. Then instead of trying to work his feet, he held them rigid and flattened as he could, and with the upper part of his body still rolling, he reached higher and kept inching up the branch as Junior backed away, and with sickening slowness he at last reached wood thick as his wrist. Then he dragged his helpless body after him to safety, where he sank in a heap to rest. "Judd, it's a good thing I went in there first," he said. "Heavy as you are, you'd have been at the bottom by now. If there is any bottom." Mickey's gaze traveled slowly over his lumpy purple frame, and then he looked closely at the others. "Why, them stingers must have give about all of it to me," he commented. "I don't see any lumps on the rest of you." "Oh, we're used to it," scoffed Judd. "They don't show on you after you get used to them. 'Sides, most all mine are on my head. I kept 'em off with the bushes." "So did I," chimed in Sam and Junior with one voice. "I guess I did get a lot the worst of it," conceded Mickey. "But if they only stung your heads, it's funny you didn't know where to put your mud." "Well, I'll tell you," said Judd earnestly. "On your head they hurt worst of all. They hurt so blame bad, you get so wild like you don't know where you are stung, and you think till you cool off a little you got them all over." "Yes, I guess you do," agreed Mickey. The boys were slowly putting on their clothing, and Junior was scowling darkly. Judd edged close. "Gosh," he whispered, "I thought it was only a little spring. I didn't think it was quicksand." "You cut out anything more," said Junior tersely. Judd nodded. After a while they started home, walking slowly, and each one being particularly careful of and good to Mickey. When he had rested, he could see that it was only an accident. Such an astounding one, he forgot his bites and could talk of little else. When the frequency and danger of the quicksands were explained to him, he was amazed that they would risk wading around the lake shores where they might be one in any step. But they said if it had been any of them, they would have known instantly, thrown themselves full length and rolled, and floated to water where they could swim. So Mickey perceived that it had been because he could not swim, and did not know what to do, that he was in danger. And later, remembering that Junior could not swim much, he wondered how he could be so careless. They made another long pause under a big tree, and Mickey felt so much better as they again started home. Then Junior lagged behind, and Judd, seeing him, joined him. Junior asked softly, "Have any more?" Judd nodded. "What?" whispered Junior. Judd told him. "Oh, that. Nothing in that. Go on." So they struck into the path they had followed from the swamp to the woods, and suddenly a warm, yielding, coiling thing slipped under Mickey's feet. With a wild cry, he leaped across the body of a big rattlesnake that had been coiled in the path. As he arose, clear cut against the light, launched the ugly head and wide jaws of the rattler, and came the sickening buzz of its rattles in mad recoil for a second stroke. "Run, Mickey! Jump!" screamed Junior. "What is it?" asked Mickey, bewildered. "Rattlesnake! Sure death!" yelled Judd. "Run, fool!" But Mickey stood perfectly still, and looked, not where the increasing buzz came from, but at them. They had no choice. Judd carried a heavy club. He threw himself in front of Mickey, and as the second stroke came, he swung at the snake's head. And then the other boys collected their senses and beat it to a pulp, and the dead mate it watched beside. Junior glared at Judd, but when he saw how frightened he was, he knew what had happened. Mickey gazed at the snakes in horror. "Ain't that a pretty small parcel to deal out sudden death in?" he asked. "And if they're laying around like that, ain't we taking an awful risk to be wading through here this way? Gee, they're the worst sight I ever saw." Mickey became violently ill. He lay down for a time, while the boys waited on him, and at last, when he could slowly walk toward home, they went on. Judd and Sam left them at the creek, and Junior and Mickey started up the Harding Lane. Suddenly Mickey sat down in a fence corner, leaned against the rails, and closed his eyes. "Gee," he said, "never felt so rotten in all my life. Maybe I'd better run for Ma. Maybe that snake grazed you." "If it did, would it kill me?" asked Mickey dully. "Well, after the yellow jacket poison in your blood, and being so tired and hot, you wouldn't stand the chance you'd had when we first started," said Junior. "Do you know where it came closest to you?" "Back of my legs, I s'pose," said Mickey. "If it had hit you, it would leave two places like needles stuck in, just the width of its head apart. I can't find anything that looks like that, thank the Lord." "Here too," said Mickey. "You see, if it or the quicksand had finished me, I haven't things fixed for Lily. They might get her yet. If anything should happen to me, she would be left with no one to take care of her." "Father would," offered Junior. "Mother never would let anybody take her. I know she wouldn't." "Well, I don't," said Mickey, "and here is where guessing doesn't cut any ice. I must be sure. To-night I'll ask him. I'd like to know how it happens that sudden death has just been rampaging after me all this trip, anyway. I seem to get it coming or going." Junior did not hide his grin quickly enough. "Ah!" greeted Mickey, suddenly tense and alert. He sprang to his feet. So did Junior. "Say, look here!" cried Mickey. "All right, look here!" retorted Junior. His face flamed red, then paled, and his hands gripped, while his jaw protruded in an ugly scowl. Then slowly and distinctly he quoted, "'Course I meant to put it to you stiff. I meant to initiate you in the ancient honourable 3rd degree of the country all right, so you'd have enough to last a lifetime, but I only meant to put you up against what I'd had in the fields and woods. I was just going to test your ginger. I wasn't counting on the quicksand and the live snake finding its dead mate Judd fixed for you. So you were sneaking in the barn this morning when we thought you were gone?" demanded Mickey. "Easy, you," cautioned Junior. "Going after the bundle I promised Judd was not sneaking." "So 'twasn't," conceded Mickey instantly. "So 'twasn't." He looked at Junior a second. "You heard us then?" he demanded. "All of it?" "I don't know," answered Junior. "I heard what I just repeated, and what you said about my being game, and exactly why I came back. Thank you for that, even if I lick you half to death in a minute. And I heard that my own mother first fixed it up with you, and then my father agreed. Oh, I heard enough." "And so you got a grouch," commented Mickey. "Yes, I did," admitted Junior. "But I got over all of it, after I'd had time to think. But that 3rd degree business, that made me so sore I told Judd about it, and he said he'd help me pay you up. But we struck the same rock you did in giving you a bigger dose than we meant to. Honest, Mickey. Judd didn't know there was a real quicksand there, and of course we didn't dream a live snake would follow and find the one the boys hunted, killed, and set for you this morning." "Awful innocent," scoffed Mickey. "'Member you didn't know about the ram either?" "Honest, I didn't, Mickey," persisted Junior. "I thought steering you into the Yellow Jackets was to be the 1st degree. Cross my heart, honest I did." Suddenly Mickey whooped. He tumbled on the grass in the fence corner and twisted in wild laughter until he was worn out. Then he struggled up, leaned against the fence, and held out his hand to Junior. "If you're willing," he said, "I'll give you the grip, and the password will be Brothers." End of chapter 17. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Michael O'Halloran by Gene STRATTON-PORTER. Chapter 18. Malcolm and the Hermit Thrush. "Give me another chance, and this time I'll be the head of my family in deed and in truth, and I'll make life go right for all of us." James Minturn. "Mr. Dovesky, I want a minute with you," said James Minturn. "All right, Mr. Minturn. What is it?" "You are quite well acquainted with Mrs. Minturn?" "Very well indeed," said Mr. Dovesky. "I have had the honor of working with her in many concerts." "And of her musical ability you are convinced?" "Brilliant is the only word," exclaimed the professor. "My reason for asking is this," said Mr. Minturn. "One of our boys, the second, Malcolm, is like his mother, and lately we discovered that he has her gift in music. We ran on it through Miss Leslie Winton, who interested Mrs. Minturn in certain wild birds." "Yes, I know," cried the professor eagerly. "When she became certain that she had heard I think she said song sparrow sing Di Provenza from Traviata, correct me if I'm wrong, until she felt that Verdi copied the bird, or the bird copied the master, she told my wife, and Nellie was greatly interested." "Yes, I know," repeated the musician. "She stopped here one day in passing and told me what she had heard from Miss Winton. She asked me if I thought there was enough in the subject to pay for spending a day investigating it. I knew very little, but on the chance that she would have a more profitable time in the woods than in society, I strongly urged her to go. She heard enough to convince her, for shortly after leaving for her usual summer trip, she wrote me twice concerning it." James Minturn tried to keep his face impassive and his voice even as he asked casually, "You mean she wrote you about studying bird music?" "Yes," said the professor. "The first letter, if I remember, came from Boston, where she found much progress had been made, and she heard of a man who had gone into the subject more deeply than anyone ever before had investigated and written a book. Her second letter was from the country near Boston, where she had gone to study under his direction. I have thought about taking it up myself at odd times this spring." "That is why I am here," said Mr. Minturn. "I want you to begin at once, and go as far as you are able, taking Malcolm with you." The boys have been spending much of their time in the country lately, hiding in blinds, selecting a bird, and practicing its notes until they copy them so perfectly they induce it to answer. They are proud as Pompey when they succeed, and it teaches them to recognize the birds. I believe this is setting their feet in the right way, but Malcolm has gone so fast and so far that he may be reproducing some of the most wonderful of the songs for all I know. For the birds come peering, calling, searching even, to the very branch which conceals him. Isn't it enough for a beginning?" "Certainly," said the musician. "He's been badly spoiled by women servants," said Mr. Minturn, "but the men are taking that out of him as fast as it can be eliminated. I think he'll behave himself. I believe he is interested enough to work. I think his mother will be delighted on her return to find him working at what she so enjoys. Does the proposition interest you?" "Deeply!" cried the professor. "Matters musical are extremely dull here now, and I can't make my usual trip abroad on account of the war. I should be delighted to take up this new subject, which I can make serve me in many ways with my advanced conservatory pupils." "May I make a suggestion?" asked Mr. Minturn. "Most assuredly!" exclaimed the professor. "You noticed I began by admitting I didn't know a thing about it, so I'll not be at all offended if you endorse the statement. My boys are large and old for the beginning they must make. I have to go carefully to find what they care for and will work at, so that I get them started without making them feel confined and forced, and so conceive a dislike for the study to which I think them best adapted. Would you find the idea of going to the country, putting a tuned violin in the hands of the lad, and letting him search for the notes he hears, and then playing the composer's selections to him, and giving his ear a chance, at all feasible?" "It's a reversal, but we could try it." "Very well, then," said Mr. Minturn, rising. "All I stipulate is that you allow the other boys and the tutor to go along, and assimilate what they can, and that when you're not occupied with Malcolm, their tutor shall have a chance to work in what he can in the way of spelling, numbers, and nature study. Is it a bargain?" "A most delightful one on my part, Mr. Minturn," said Mr. Dovesky. "When shall I begin?" "Whenever you have selected the instrument you want the boy to have. Call Mr. Tower at my residence, and arrange with him to come for you," said Mr. Minturn. "You can't start too soon to suit the boy or me." "Very well, then. I'll make my plans and call the first thing in the morning," said the professor. James Minturn went home, and at the lunch table told what he had done. "Won't that be great, Malcolm?" cried James Jr. "Maybe you can do the music so well you can be a bird man, and stand upon a stage before 1,000 people, and make all of them think you're a bird." "I believe I'd like to do it," said Malcolm. "If I find out the people who make music have gone and copied in what the birds sing, and haven't told they did it, I'll tell on them. It's no fair way, 'cause of course the birds sang their songs before men, didn't they, father?" "I think so, but I can't prove it," said Mr. Minturn. "Can you prove it, Mr. Tower?" asked Malcolm. "Yes," said Mr. Tower. "Science proves that the water forms developed first. Crickets were singing before the birds, and both before man appeared." "Then that's what I think," said Malcolm. "When are they to begin, James?" asked Mrs. Winslow. "Mr. Dovesky is to call Mr. Tower in the morning, and tell him what arrangements he has been able to make," answered Mr. Minturn. "Malcolm, you are old enough to recognize that he is a great man, and it is a big thing for him to leave his conservatory and his work, and go to the woods to teach one small boy what the birds say. You'll be very polite and obey him instantly, will you not?" "Do I have to mind him just like he was Mr. Tower?" "I don't think you are obeying Mr. Tower because you must," said Aunt Margaret. "Seems to me I saw you with your arms around his neck last night, and I think I heard you tell him that you'd give him all your money except for your violin if he wouldn't go away this winter. Honestly, Malcolm, do you obey Mr. Tower because you feel forced to?" "No," cried Malcolm. "We have dandy times. No boys anywhere have as much fun as we do, and we are learning a lot, too. I wonder if Mr. Dovesky will join our campfire." "Very probably. He'll be eager to when he finds out about it," said Mrs. Winslow, and more than likely you'll obey him just as you do Father and Mr. Tower, because you love to." "Father, are William and I going to study the birds?" asked James. "If you like," said Mr. Minturn. "It would please me greatly if each of you would try hard to understand what Mr. Dovesky teaches, Malcolm, and to learn all of it you can, and to produce credible bird calls if possible. And of course these days you're not really educated until you know the birds, flowers, and animals around you. It is now a component and a delightful part of life." "Do you have to pay him a lot to go with us?" "It isn't probable that he would go for love only." "Gee, it's a pity Mother isn't here," said Malcolm. "I bet she knows more about it than Mr. Dovesky." "I bet she does too," agreed James, "but she wouldn't go where we do. There isn't a party there, and if a mosquito bit her she'd have a fit, and the dresses she wears would scare the birds into fits." "Aw, she would if she wanted to," insisted Malcolm. "Well, she wouldn't want to," said James. "Well, she might, smarty," said Malcolm. "She did once. I saw the boots and skirt she was going to wear. Don't you wish she liked the things we do better than parties, Father?" "Yes, I wish she did," said Mr. Minturn. "Maybe some day she will." "If she'd hear me call the quail and the whippoorwill, she'd like it," said Malcolm. "She wouldn't like it well enough to stay away from a party to go with you to hear it," said James. "She might," persisted Malcolm. "She didn't know about this when she went to the parties. When she comes back I'm going to tell her, and I'm going to take her to hear me, and I'll show her the flowers, and my fish pond, and yours and Father's. Wouldn't it be fun if she'd wear the boots again and make a fish pond too?" "Yes, she'd wear boots," scoffed James. "Well, she would if she wanted to," reiterated Malcolm. "She wore them when she wanted to hear the birds. If she did once, she would again if she pleased." "Well, she wouldn't please," laughed James. "Well, she might," said Malcolm stubbornly. "Mightn't she, Father?" "If she went once, I see no reason why she shouldn't again," said Mr. Minturn. "Course she'll go again," triumphed Malcolm. "I'll make her when she comes." "Yes, when she comes," jeered James. "She won't ever live here. She wouldn't think this was good enough for Lucette and Gretchen, and she gave away our house for the sick children, and she hates it at grandmother's. Bet she doesn't ever come again." "Bet she does," said Malcolm instantly. "What will you bet?" asked James. "Would you like to have Mother come here, Malcolm?" interrupted Mr. Minturn quietly. "Why," he said, and shifted his questioning gaze toward Aunt Margaret. Why, I'll tell you, Father. If she would wear boots and go see the birds and the flowers, if she would do as we do, sometimes in the night I wake up and think how pretty she is, and I just get hungry to see her. But of course it would only kick up a row for her to come here. Of course she'd better stay away. But, Father, if she would come, and if she would wear the boots, and if she'd let old slapping Lucette go and live as we do, Father, wouldn't that be great?" "Yes, I think it would," said James Minturn conclusively, as he excused himself and arose from the table. "James," said Malcolm, when they went to their schoolroom, "if Mr. Dovesky goes to shutting us up in the study and won't let us play while we learn, what will we do to him to make him sick of his job?" "Oh, things would turn up," replied James. "But, Malcolm, wouldn't you kind of hate to have him see you be mean?" "Well, Father saw us be mean," said Malcolm. "Yes, but what would you give if he hadn't?" "I'm not proud of it," replied Malcolm. "Yes, and that's just it," cried James. "That's just what comes of living here. All of them are so polite, and if you are halfway decent, they are so good to you, and they help you do things that will make you into a man who needn't be ashamed of himself. That's just it. How would you like to go back and be so rough and so mean nobody at all would care for us?" "Father wouldn't let us, would he?" asked Malcolm. "He wouldn't if he could help it," said James. "He didn't used to seem as if he could help it. Don't you remember he would tell us it was not the right way, and try to make us be decent, and Lucette would tell Mother, and Mother would fire him? I wonder how she could. And if she could then, why doesn't she now? I guess she doesn't want to stop her party to bother with us. But if she ever comes and wants to take us back like we were, Malcolm, I'm not going. I like what we've got now. I ain't ever going back to be jerked and kicked again. Mother always said we were to be gentlemen, but we never could be that way. Father and Mr. Tower and Mr. Dovesky are gentlemen, just as kind and easy and fine. When we were mean as could be and had to be carried around and acted like fight cats, you remember Father and Mr. Tower only held us. They didn't get mad and beat us. If Mother comes, you may go with her if you want to." "I wish she'd come with us," said Malcolm. "Not Mother. We ain't her kind of a party." "I know it," admitted Malcolm slowly. "Sometimes I want her just awful. I wonder why." "I guess it's 'cause a boy is born wanting his mother. I want her myself a lot of times, but I wouldn't go with her if she'd come today, so I don't know why I want her, but I do sometimes." "I didn't know you did," said Malcolm. "Well, I do," said James, "but I ain't ever going. Often I think the queerest things." "What queer things do you think, James?" "Why, like this," said James, "that it ain't safe to let children be jerked and their heads knocked. You know what Lucette did to Elizabeth? I think she hit her head too hard. She gave me more cake and said I was a good boy for saying ice made her sick. But all the time I thought it was hitting her head. I wouldn't be the boy who said that again if I had to be shot for not saying it, like the French boy was about the soldiers. 'Member that day?" "Yes, I do," said Malcolm shortly. "You know you coaxed her off the bench, and I pushed her in," said James slowly. "Yes," said Malcolm, "and I kicked her. And I wasn't mad at her a bit. She hadn't done anything to me. I wonder why I did it." "I guess you did it because you were more of an animal than a decent boy, same as I pushed her," said James. "I think of that and think of it. I guess I won't ever forget that I pushed her." "Pushing her wasn't as bad as what I did," said Malcolm. "I guess ain't either one of us going to feel right about Elizabeth again long as we live." "Malcolm, we can't get her back," said James. "But if any way happens that we ever get another little sister, we'll take care of her like Father wanted to and always got fired." "You bet we will," said Malcolm. Next morning the boys had the car ready. They packed in all their bird books and their flower records and botanies, and were eagerly waiting when the call from Mr. Dovesky came. At once they drove to his home for him, and from there to a music store where a violin was selected for Malcolm. Mr. Dovesky was so big the boys stood in awe of his size. He was so clean, no boy would want to see him dirty. He was so handsome, it was good to watch his face, because you had to like him when he smiled. He was so polite that you never for a minute forgot that soon you were going to be a man, and if you could be the man you wished, you would be exactly like him. Both boys were very shy of him, and very much afraid his entrance into their party would spoil their fun. When they left the music store, Malcolm carefully carrying his new violin, Mr. Dovesky his, and a roll of music, the boys with anxious hearts awaited developments. "Now, Mr. Tower," said Mr. Dovesky, arranging his load in the carrying case and handling the violins like babies, "suppose we drive wherever you are likely to find the birds you have been practicing on, and for a start let me hear just what you have done and can do, and then I can plan better to work in with you." The boys looked at each other. That sounded hopeful. They instantly became a couple of willing and most obliging boys, eager to please and to prove that what they had been doing was wise and instructive. When they reached the brook, they stopped to show the fish pools, and then entered an old orchard long abandoned for fruit growing, and so worm-infested as to make it a bird paradise. Cuckoos, jays, robins, bluebirds, thrashers, orioles, ground sparrows, vireos nested there and sang on wing among the trees, on the fences, and from bushes in the corners. Malcolm and Mr. Dovesky secreted themselves on a board laid across the rails of an alder-filled fence corner, and the boy began pointing out the birds he knew, and giving his repetition of their calls, cries, bits of song, sometimes whistled, sometimes half-spoken, half-whistled, any vocal rendition that would produce the bird tones. He had practiced carefully. He was slightly excited, and sooner than usual he received replies. Little feathered folk came peeping, peering, calling, and beyond question answering Malcolm's notes. In an hour Mr. Dovesky was holding his breath with interest, suggesting corrections, trying notes himself, and when he felt he had whistled accurately and heard a bird reply, he was as proud as the boy. Then a thing happened that none of them had mentioned, because they were not sure enough that it would. A brown thrush, catching the unusual atmosphere of the orchard that morning, selected the tallest twig of an apple tree and showed that orchard what real music was. The thrush preened, flirted his feathers, opened his beak widely, and sang his first liquid notes. "Starts on C," commented Mr. Dovesky softly. "3 times and does it over to show us we needn't think it was an accident. And he can't do it often as he pleases," whispered Malcolm. Mr. Dovesky glanced at the boy and nodded. "There he goes from C to E," he commented an instant later. "Repeats that C again, falls to B, up to G, repeats that. I wish he would wait till I get my pencil." "I can give it to you," said Malcolm. "He does each strain over as soon as he sings it. I know his song." On the back of an envelope, Mr. Dovesky was sketching a staff of music in natural key, setting off measures and filling in notes. As the bird confused him with repetitions on trills on E or C so high he had to watch sharply to catch just what it was, his fingers trembled when he added lines to the staff for the highest notes. For 15 minutes the blessed bird sang, and at each rendition of its full strain it seemed to grow more intoxicated with its own performance. Finishing the last notes perfectly, the bird gave a hop, glanced around as if he were saying, "Now anyone who thinks he can surpass that has my permission to try." From a bush a small gray bird meowed in derision and accepted the challenge. The watchers could not see him because he remained in seclusion, but he came so close, singing the same song, that he deceived Mr. Dovesky, for he said, "He's going to do it over from the bushes now." "Listen," cautioned Malcolm. "Don't you hear the difference? He starts the same, but he runs higher. He drops lower and does it quicker. And I think the notes clearer and sweeter when the little gray fellow sings them. And you should see his nest. Do you like him better?" "Humph!" said Mr. Dovesky. "Why, I was so entranced with the first performance, I didn't suppose anything could be better. I must have time to learn both songs and analyze and compare." "I can't do Gray's yet," said Malcolm. "It's so fine and cut up with going up and down on the jump, but I got the start of it. And the part that goes this way?" "This is my work," cried Mr. Dovesky. "Is there any chance the apple tree bird will repeat his performance?" "Mostly he doesn't till evening," answered Malcolm. "He's pretty sure to again tomorrow morning, but old Cat of the Bushes, he sings any time it suits him all day. His nest isn't where he sings, and he doesn't ever perch up so high and make such a fuss about it. But I think mother would like his notes best." "First," said Mr. Dovesky, "I'll take down what Mr. Brown Bird sang and learn it. I'd call that a good start. And when I get his song so I can whistle and play it on the instruments, then we'll go at Mr. Cat's song, and see if I can learn why and in what way you think it finer." "Oh, it goes from high to low quicker, more notes in a bunch, and sweeter tones trilling," explained Malcolm. Mr. Dovesky laughed, and said in a question of music that would constitute quite a difference. They went to the brook and lunched, and made easy records of syllabic calls that could be rendered in words and by whistling. Then all of them gathered around Mr. Dovesky, and he drew lines, crossed them with bands, and explained the staff and different time and signatures, and together they had their first music lesson. Malcolm whistled the thrush song, while Mr. Dovesky copied the notes, tuned the violin, and showed the boy how the strings corresponded to the lines he had made, where the notes lay on them, and how to draw them out with the bow, and he couldn't explain fast enough to satisfy the eager lad. After Mr. Dovesky had gone as far as he thought wise, and left off with music, he wandered with Mr. Tower, hunting flowers in which he seemed almost as much interested as the music. Malcolm clung to the violin, and over ran the natural scale he had been taught, and then slowly, softly, with wavering, awkward bow, he began whistling plain, easy calls, and hunting up and down the strings for them. That day was the beginning. Others did not dawn fast enough to suit Malcolm, and the ease with which he mastered the songs of the orchard and reproduced them in a few days set him begging to be taken to the swamp to hear the bird that sang from the book. Leslie Winton was added to the party that day, and Malcolm came from the land of the tamarack obsessed. James, William, and the tutor did not care for that location, but Malcolm and Mr. Dovesky wanted to erect a tent and take provisions and their instruments, and live among the dim coolness where miracles of song burst on the air at any moment. They heard and identified the veery. They went on their knees at their first experience with the clear, bell-toned notes of the wood thrush. With a little practice, Malcolm could reproduce the song from the book, and he talked of it incessantly, sang and whistled it, making patent to every member of the family that what was in his heart was fully as much a desire to do the notes so literally that he would win the commendation of his mother, as to obtain an answer from an unsuspecting bird, for that was the sport, the big thing for which to strive. They worked to obtain a record so accurately, to reproduce it so perfectly, that the bird making it would answer and come at their call. The day Malcolm, hidden in the tamarack swamp, coaxed the sparrow, now flitting widely and feeding its young, he knew not how far, to the bush sheltering him, and with its own notes set it singing against him as a rival, the boy was no happier than Mr. Dovesky. Mr. Minturn could not quite agree to the camp at the swamp, but he provided a car and a driver, and allowed them to go each morning, and often to remain late at night to practice owl and nighthawk calls, veery notes, chat cries, and the unsurpassed melody of the evening vespers of the hermit bird. This song, once heard, comprehended, copied, and reproduced, the musician and the boy, with music in his heart, brain, and fingertips, clung to each other and suffered the exquisite pain of the artist experiencing joy so poignant it hurt. After a mastery of those notes as to time, tone, and grouping, came the task of perfecting them so that the bird would reply. Hours they practiced until far in the night, and when Malcolm felt he really had located a bird, gained its attention, and set it singing against him, he was wild, and nothing would satisfy him but that his father should go to the swamp with him, and, well hidden, hear and see that he called the bird. Gladly Mr. Minturn assented. Whether the boy succeeded in this was a matter of great importance to his father, but it was not paramount. The thing that concerned him most was that Malcolm's interest in what he was doing, his joy in the study he was making, had bred a deep regard in his heart for his instructor. The boy loved the man intensely in a few days, and immediately began studying him, watching him, copying him. He moved with swift alertness, spoke with care to select the best word, and was fast becoming punctiliously polite. On their return, Mr. Dovesky had fallen into the habit of lunching with the Minturns. The things of which he and the boy reminded each other, the notes they reproduced by whistling, calling, or a combination, the execution of these on the violin, the references Mr. Dovesky made to certain bird songs which recalled to his mind passages in operas, in secular and sacred productions, his rendition of the wild music and then the human notes, his comparison of the two, and his remarks on different composers, his mastery of the violin, and his ability to play long passages preceding and following the parts taken from the birds, were intensely absorbing and educative to all of them. Then Mr. Tower would add the description and history of each bird in question. Mr. Minturn started the boys' library with interesting works on ornithology, everything that had been written concerning strains in bird and human music, the lives and characters of the musicians in whose work the bird passages appeared, or who used melodies so like the birds that made the fact apparent the feathered folk had inspired them. This led to minute examination of the lives of the composers. In an effort to discover which of them were country-born and had worked in haunts where birds might be heard, the differing branches of information opened up seemed endless. The change this work made in the boys appeared to James Minturn and his sister as something marvelous. That the work was also making a change in the heart of the man himself was an equal miracle he did not realize. As each day new avenues opened, he began to understand dimly how much it would have meant to him in his relations with his wife if he had begun long ago under her tuition and learned, at least enough to appreciate the one thing outside society which she found absorbing. He began to see that if he had listened and tried, and had induced her to repeat to him parts of the great composer she so loved on her instruments when they reached home, he soon could have come to recognize them, and so an evening at the opera with her would have meant pleasure to him instead of stolid endurance. Ultimately, it might have meant an effective wedge with which to pry against the waste of time, strength, and money on the sheer amusement of herself in society. Once he started searching for them, he found many ways in which he might have made his life with his wife different, if indeed he had not had it in his power to effect a complete change by having been firm in the beginning. Of this one thing he was sure to certainty, that if he had been able to introduce any such element of interest into his wife's residence as he had, through merely saying the word in his own, it surely would have made some of the big difference that it was making now. He found himself brooding, yearning over his sons, and his feeling for them broadening and deepening, as he daily saw James seeking more and more to be with him, to understand what he was doing. His pride in being able to feel that he had helped, if it were no more than to sit in court and hand a marked book at the right moment, he began to make a comrade of, and to develop a feeling of dependence on, the boy. He watched Malcolm with his quicker intellect, his daily evidence of temperament, his rapidly developing musical ability, and felt the tingle of pride in his lithe, ruddy beauty so like his mother, and his talent so like hers. The boys, under the interest of the music, and with the progress he was making in doing a new, unusual thing, soon began to develop her mannerisms. When he was most polite, her charm was apparent. When he was offended, her hauteur enveloped him. When he was pleased and happy, her delicate tinge of rose flushed his transparent cheek, and the lights on his red-brown hair glinted with her color. He shut himself in his room and worked with his violin until time to start to the tamarack swamp. When Mr. Minturn promptly appeared with the car, he found Malcolm had borrowed Mr. Dovesky's khaki suit and waders for him, and on the advice of the boy he wore the stiff, coarse clothing which the tamaracks would not tear, the mosquitoes could not bite through, and muck and water would not easily penetrate. There were many reasons. When they reached the swamp, both of them put on boots, and then, following his son and doing exactly what he was told, James Minturn forgot law, politics, and business. With anxious heart he prayed that the bird the lad wished to sing would evolve its sweetest notes, and that his high hope of reproducing the music perfectly enough to induce the singer to answer would be fulfilled. Malcolm advanced softly, slipping under branches, around bushes, over deep moss beds that sank in an ooze of water at the pressure of a step and sprang back on release. Imitating every caution, stepping in the boy's tracks and keeping a few rods behind, followed his father. He had rolled his sleeves to the elbow, left his shirt open at the throat, and for weeks the joy of wind and weather on his bared head had been his, so that as he silently followed his son, he made an impressive figure. At a certain point Malcolm stopped and motioned his father to come to him. "Now this is as far as I've gone yet," he whispered. "You stay here, and we'll wait till the music begins. If I can do it as well as I have for 3 nights, and get an answer, I'm going to try to call the hermit bird I sing with. If a hen answers, I'll do the male notes, and try to coax her where you can see her. If a male sings, I'll do his song once or twice to show you how close I can come, and then I'll do the hen's call note, and see if I can coax him out for you. If I creep ahead, you keep covered as much as you can and follow, but stay as far as that big tree behind me, and don't for your life move or make a noise when I'm still. I'll go far ahead as I want to be to start on. Now don't forget to be quiet and listen hard." "Oh, I won't forget," said James Minturn. "Oh, but it will be awful if one doesn't sing tonight." "Not at all," answered Mr. Minturn. "This is a new experience for me. I'll get the benefit of a sight of the swamp that will pay for the trip, if I don't even see a bird." By the boy's sigh of relief, the father knew he had quieted his anxiety. Malcolm went softly ahead a few yards and stopped, sheltering himself in a clump of willow and button bushes. His father made himself as inconspicuous as he could and waited. He studied the trunks of the big scaly trees, the intermingled branches covered with tufts of tiny spines, and here and there the green cones nestling upright. The cool water rising around his feet called his attention to the deep moss bed, silvery green in the evening light. Here and there on moss mounds at the tree bases he could see the broad leaves and pointed, ripening pods that he thought might be moccasin seeding. Then his eyes sought the crouching boy, and again he prayed that he would not be disappointed. And with his prayer came the answer. A sweep of wings overhead, a brown flash through the tamaracks, and then a burst of slow, sweet notes, then silence. James Minturn leaned forward, his eyes on his son, his precious little lad. How the big, strong man hoped, until it became the very essence of prayer, that he would be granted the pride and pleasure, the triumph of success, for his ears told him that to reproduce the notes he had just heard would undoubtedly be the crowning performance of bird music. Surely there could be no other songster gifted like that. The bird made a short flight and sang again. Across the swamp came a repetition of his notes from another of his kind, and the brown streak moved in that direction. At its next pause its voice arose again, sweeter for the mellowing distance, and then another bird not so far away answered. The bird replied and came winging in sight, this time peering, uttering a short note unlike its song, and not until it came searching where he could see it distinctly did James Minturn awake to the realization that the last notes had been Malcolm's. His heart swelled big with prideful possession. What a wonderful accomplishment! What a fine boy! How careful he must be to help and to guide him! Again the bird across the swamp sang, and the one in sight turned in that direction. Then began a duet that was a marvelous experience. The far bird called. Malcolm answered. Soon they heard a reply. Mr. Minturn saw the boy beckoning him and crept to his side. "It's a female," whispered Malcolm. "I'm going to sing the male notes and calls and try to toll her. You follow, but don't get too close and scare her." The father could see the tense poise of Malcolm, stepping lightly, avoiding the open, stooping beneath branches, hiding in bushes, making his way onward at every complete ambush, sending forth those wonderful notes. At each repetition it seemed to the father that the song grew softer, more pleading, of fuller intonation, and then his heart almost stopped, for he began to realize that each answer to the boy's call was closer than the one before. Malcolm would sleep that night with a joyful heart. He was tolling the bird he imitated. It was coming at his call. Of that there could be no question. His last notes came from a screen of spreading button bushes and northern holly. At the usual interval they heard the reply, but recognizably closer. Malcolm raised his hand without moving or looking back, but his father saw and interpreted the gesture to mean that the time had come for him to stop. He took a few steps to conceal himself, for he was between trees when the signal came, and paused, already so elated he wanted to shout. He scarcely could restrain the impulse. What was the use in going further? His desire was to race back to Multiopolis at speed limit to tell Mr. Dovesky, Margaret, and Mr. Tower what a triumph he had witnessed. He wanted to talk about it to his men friends and business associates. Distinctly, through the slowly darkening green, he could see the boy putting all his heart into the song. James Minturn watched so closely he was not mistaken in thinking he could see the lad's figure grow tense as he delivered the notes, and relax when the answer relieved his anxiety as to whether it would come again, and then gather for another trial. At the last call the reply came from such a short distance that Mr. Minturn began intently watching from his shelter to witness the final triumph of seeing the bird Malcolm had called across the swamp come into view. He could see that the boy was growing reckless, for as he delivered the strain he stepped almost into the open, watching before him and slowly going ahead. With the answer there was a discernible movement a few yards away. Mr. Minturn saw the boy start and gazed at him. With bent body Malcolm stared before him, and then his father heard his amazed, awed cry, "Why, mother! Is that you, mother?" "Malcolm! "Are you Malcolm?" came the incredulous answer. James Minturn was stupefied. Distinctly he could see now. He did not recognize the knee boots, the outing suit of coarse green material, but the beautiful pink face slowly paling, the bright waving hair framing it, he knew very well. Astonishment bound him. Malcolm advanced another step, still half dazed, and cried, "Why, have I been calling you? I thought it was the bird I saw still answering, and I believed you were the hermit singing," she said. "But you fooled the bird," said the boy. "Close here it answered you." "And near me it called you," said Mrs. Minturn. "Your notes were quite as perfect." Malcolm straightened and seemed reassured. "Why, mother!" he exclaimed. "When did you study bird music? Have you just come back?" "I've been away only 2 weeks, Malcolm," she answered, "and if it hadn't been for learning the bird notes, I'd have returned sooner." "But where have you been?" cried the boy. "At home. I reserved my suite," she answered. "But home's all torn up, and pounding, and sick people, and you hate pounding and sick people," he reminded her. "There wasn't so very much noise, Malcolm," she said, "and I've changed about sickness. You have to suffer yourself to do that. Once you learn how dreadful pain is, you feel only pity for those who endure it. Every night when the nurses are resting, I change, so no one knows me, and slip into the rooms of the suffering little children who can't sleep, and try to comfort them." "Mother, who takes care of you?" he questioned. "A very sensible girl named Susan," she answered. The boy went a step closer. "Mother, have you changed about anything besides sickness?" he asked eagerly. "Yes, Malcolm," said his mother. "I've changed about every single thing in all this world that I ever said or did or loved when you knew me." "You have?" he cried in amazement. "Would you wear that dress and come to the woods with us now, and do some of the things we like? I'd rather come here with you and sing these bird notes than anything else I ever did," she answered. Malcolm advanced another long stride. "Mother, is Susan a pounding, beating person like Lucette?" he asked anxiously. "No," she said softly. "Susan likes children. When she's not busy for me, she goes into the music room and plays games and sings songs to the little sick people." "Because you know," said Malcolm, "James and I talk it over when we are alone. We never let father hear, because he loved Elizabeth so, and he's so fine. Mother, you were mistaken about father not being a gentleman. Not even Mr. Dovesky is a finer gentleman than father, and father loved her so. But mother, James and I saw. We believe if it had been the cream, it would have made us sick too, and we're so ashamed of what we did. If we had another chance, we'd be as good to a little sister as father is to us. Mother, we wish we had her back so we could try again." Nellie Minturn shut her eyes and swayed on her feet, but presently she spoke in a harsh, breathless whisper, yet it carried even to the ears of the listening man. "Yes, Malcolm, I'd give my life, oh so gladly, if I could bring her back and try over." "You wouldn't have any person around like Lucette, would you, mother?" he questioned. "Not ever again, Malcolm," she answered. "I'd have little sister back if it were possible, but that can't ever be, because when we lose people as Elizabeth went, they never can come back. But I'll offer my life to come as near replacing her as possible, and everywhere I've neglected you and James and father, I'll do the best there is in me if any of you love me or want me in the least, or will give me an opportunity to try." "Mother, would you come where we are? Would you live as we do?" marveled the boy. "Gladly," she answered. "It's about the only way I could live now. I've given away so much of the money." "Then I'll ask father," cried the boy. "Why, I forgot! Father is right back here. Father! Father! Father, come quick! Father, it wasn't the hermit bird at all! It was mother! And oh, joy, father, joy! She's just changed and changed till she's most as changed as we are. She'll come back, father, and she'll go to the woods with us. Oh, she will! Father, you're glad, aren't you?" When Nellie Minturn saw her husband coming across the mosses, his arm outstretched, his face pain-tortured, she came swiftly forward, and as she reached Malcolm, Mr. Minturn caught both of them in his arms, crying, "My sweetheart, my beautiful sweetheart, give me another chance, and this time I'll be the head of my family in deed and in truth, and I'll make life go right for all of us. End of chapter 18. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Michael O'Halloran by Gene Stratton-Porter. Chapter 19, Establishing Protectorates. You just bet my world is full of nice men, packed like sardines. But they'd all scrooge up a little and make room for you on the top layer among the selects. Come on now, rustle for your place before we revolve and leave you. Mickey. I'm sorry, no end, said Mickey. First time I ever been late. I was helping Peter. We were so busy that the first thing I knew, I heard the hum of her gliding past the clover field, so I was left. I know how hard you're working. It won't happen again. Mickey studied his friend closely. He decided the time had come to watch. Douglas Bruce was pale and restless. He spent long periods in frowning thought. He aroused from one of these and asked, "What were you and Peter doing that was so very absorbing?" "Well, about the most interesting thing that ever happened," said Mickey. "You see, Peter is one of the grandest men who ever lived. He's so fine and doing so many big things. In a way, he kind of fell behind in the little ones." "I've heard of men doing that before," commented Douglas. "Can't you tell me a new one?" "Sure," said Mickey. "You know the place and how good it seems on the outside. Well, it didn't look so good inside, in the parts that counted most. You've noticed the big barns, sheds, and outbuildings, all the modern conveniences for a man, from an electric lantern to a stump puller. Everything, I'm telling you. And for the nice lady Nix. Her work table faced a wall covered with brown oilcloth, and frying pans heavy enough to sprain Willard. A wood fire to boil clothes and bake bread. In this hot weather, the room so low and dark. No ice box, with acres of ice close every winter. No water inside, no furnace, and carrying wash tubs to the kitchen for bathing as well as washing. Ah, gee, you get the picture?" "I certainly do," agreed Douglas. "And yet she was a neat, nice-looking little woman." "Sure," said Mickey. "If she had set up housekeeping in Sunrise Alley, in one day you could tell her place from anybody else's. Sure, she's a nice lady. But she has troubles of her own. I guess everybody has." "Yes, I think they have," assented Douglas. "I could muster a few right now myself." "Yes?" cried Mickey. "That's bad. Let's drop this and cut them out." "Presently," said Douglas. "My head is so tired it will do me good to think about something else a few minutes. You were saying Mrs. Harding had trouble? What is it?" Mickey returned to his subject with a chuckle. "She was about ready to tackle them nervous prostrations so popular with the swell dames," he explained, "because every morning for 15 years she'd faced the brown oilcloth and pots and pans, while she'd been wild to watch sunup from under a particular old apple tree, when she might have seen it every morning if Peter had been on his job enough to saw a window in the right place. Got that?" "Yes, I get it," conceded Douglas. "Go on." "Well, I began her work, so she started right away, and before she got back, in comes Peter. When he asked where she was and why she went, I was afraid, but for her sake I told him. I told him everything I had noticed. At first he didn't like it." "It's a wonder he didn't break your neck." "Well," said Mickey judicially, "as I size up Peter, he'd fight an awful fight if he was fighting, but he ain't much on starting a fight. I worked the separator steady, and by, when I summed up the argument, as a friend of mine says, I guess that cream separator didn't look any bigger to Peter set beside a full house and 2 or 3 sheds for the stuff he'd bought to make his work easier than it did to me." "I'll wager it didn't," laughed Douglas. "No, it didn't," cried Mickey earnestly. And when he stood over it a while, that big iron stove made his kitchen, where his wife lived most of her day, seem 'bout as hot as my room, where he was raving over Lily having been. And when he faced the brown oilcloth and the old iron skillets for a few minutes of silent thought, he bolted at about 2. Peter ain't slow. What did he do? Asked Douglas. Why, he planned to send her on a visit, said Mickey, and cut that window and move in the pump, and invest in one of those country gas plants run on a big tank of gasoline away outside where it's all safe, and a bread mixer and a dishwasher and some lighter cooking things. But we got interned. How, Mickey? Interestedly inquired Douglas. Remember I told you about Junior coming in to hunt work because he was tired of the country, and how it turned out? Said Mickey. Yes, I recall perfectly, answered Douglas. There's a good one on me about that I haven't told you yet, but I will, said Mickey. Well, when Son came home wrapped in a comfort, there was a ripping up on the part of Peter. He just hurled back the enemy, and who do you think he hit the hardest? I haven't an idea, said Douglas. In your shoes I hadn't had one either, said Mickey. Well, he didn't go for Junior, or his ma, or me. Peter stood Mr. Peter Harding out before us, and then didn't leave him a leg to stand on. He proved conclusive he'd used every spare moment he'd had since Junior was in short clothes, carrying him to Multiopolis to amuse him, and feed him treats and show him shows. So he was to blame if Junior developed a big consuming appetite for such things. How does the argument strike you? Sound, cried Douglas, perfectly sound. It's precisely what the landowners are doing every day of their lives, and then wailing because the cities take their children. I've had that studied out for a year past. Well, Peter figured it right there for us in detail, said Mickey. Then he tackled Ma Harding and her son up, and then he thought out a way to furnish entertainment and all the modern comforts right there at home. What entertainment? Said Douglas. Well, he specified saddles and horses to ride, grinned Mickey, and swimming and a fishing boat, and tackle for all of us, a launch on whatever lake we like best, a big entertainment house with a floor for skating and dancing, and a stage for plays we will get up ourselves, and a movie machine. I'm to find out how to run one and teach them, and then he'll rent reels and open it twice a week. The big hole that will cave in on the north side of Multiopolis soon now will be caused by the slump, when our neighborhood withdraws its patronage and begins being entertained by Peter. And you'll see that it'll work, too. Of course it will, agreed Douglas. Once the country folk get the idea, it will go like a landslide. So that's what made you late? Well, connected with that, explained Mickey. Peter didn't do a thing but figure up the price he'd paid for every labor saver he'd ever bought for himself, and he came out a little over $6,000. He said he wouldn't have wanted Ma in a hardware store selecting his implements, so he guessed he wouldn't choose hers. He just drew a check for what he said was her due, with interest, and put it in her name in the bank, and told her to cut loose and expend it exactly as she pleased. What did she do? Marveled Douglas. Well, she was tickled silly, but she didn't lose her head, and she began investigating what had been put on the market to meet her requirements. At present we are living on the threshing floor mostly, and the whole house is packed up. When it is unpacked, there'll be a bathroom on the second floor, and a lavatory in the first. There'll be a furnace in one room of the basement, and a coal bin big enough for a winter's supply. We can hitch onto the trolley line for electric lights all over the house, and barn, and outbuildings, and a fireless cooker, iron and vacuum cleaner, and a whole bunch of conveniences for Ma, including a washing machine and stationary tubs in the basement. Gee, get the picture? I surely do. What else, Mickey? Asked Douglas. You know I've a house to furnish soon myself. Well, a new kitchen on the other end of the building where there's a breeze, and a big clover field, and a wood, and a work table right where it is in line with her private and particular sun-up. There's a big sink with hot and cold water and a dishwasher. There's a bread mixer and a little glass churn, both of which can be hitched to the electricity to run. There's a big register from the furnace close the work table for winter, and a gas cook stove that has more works than a watch. What does the lady say about it?" "Mighty little," said Mickey. "She just stands and wipes the shiny places with her apron or handkerchief, and laughs and cries 'cause she's so glad. It ain't set up yet, but you can see just standing before it what it's going to mean for her. And there's a chute from the upstairs to the basement to scoot the wash down to the electric machine to rub them, and a little gas stove with 2 burners to boil them, and the iron I told you of. Hanging it up is the hardest part of the wash these days, and since they have 3 big rooms in the basement, Peter thought this morning that he could put all the food in one, and stretch her lines in the winter for the clothes to dry in the washroom. The furnace will heat it, and it's light and clean. We are going to paint it when everything is in place." "Is that all?" queried Douglas. "It's a running start," said Mickey. "I don't know as Peter will ever get to all. The kitchen is going to have white woodwork, and blue walls, and blue linoleum, and new blue and white enameled cooking things from start to finish, with no iron in the bunch except 2 skillets saved for frying. Even the dishpan is going to be blue, and she's crying and laughing same time while she hems her blue and white wash curtains for the windows. All the house is going to have hardwood floors, the rooms cut more convenient. Out goes the old hall into just a small place to take off your wraps, and the remainder added to the parlor. All the carpets and the old heavy curtains are being ground up and woven into rugs. Gee, it's an insurrection! Ma Harding and I surely started things when we planned to dose Junior on Multiopolis and let her view the landscape o'er. You can tell by her face she's seeing it. If she sails into the port of glory looking more glorified, it'll be a wonder. And Peter, you ought to see Peter. And Junior, you should see Junior planning his room. And Mickey, you must see Mickey planning his. And Mary and Bobby, and above all, you should see Lily. Last I saw of her, Peter was holding her under her arms, and she was shoving her feet before her, trying to lift them up a little. We've most rubbed them off her with fine sand, and then stuck them in cold water, and then sanded them again, and they're not the same feet, that's a cinch." "Is that the sum of the Harding improvements?" asked Douglas, drawing fine lines on a sheet of figures before him. "Well, it's a fair showing," said Mickey. "We ain't got the new rugs, and the music box, and the books, or the old furniture rubbed and oiled yet. When the house is finished, Peter expressly specified that his lady was to get her clothes so she could go to the clubhouse, and not be picked for a countrywoman by what she wore. Mickey, this is so interesting, it has given my head quite a rest. Maybe now I can see my way clearly. But one more thing. How long are you planning to stay there? You talk as if—" "Stay there?" said Mickey. "Didn't you hear me say there was a horse and a saddle, and a room for me, and a room for Lily? Stay there? Why, forever and evermore. That's home. When I got into trouble and called on Peter to throw a lifeline, he did it up browner than his job for Ma. A line was all I asked for, but Peter established a regular protectorate. Nobody can get us now." "You mean Peter adopted both of you?" cried Douglas. "Sure!" endorsed Mickey with a flourish. "You see, it was like this. When we dosed Junior with Multiopolis, the old threshing machine took a hand and did some things to him that wasn't on the program. He found out about it, and it made him mad. When he got his dander up, he hit back by turning old Miss Country loose on me. First I tried to ram, and Yellow Jackets. Then only a little bunch of maple twigs was all the pull I had to keep me from going to the bottomless pit by the way of the nastiest quicksand on Atwater Lake. Us fellows went back one day and fed it logs bigger than I am, and it sucked them down like Peter does a plate of noodles. Then Junior thought curling a big dead rattler in the path and shunting me so I'd step right on it would be a prime joke. But he didn't figure on the snake he had fixed for me having a mate as big and ugly as it was, that would follow and coil zipping mad over the warm, twisting body. "Mickey!" gasped Douglas. "Just so. Exactly what I thought, and then some. When I dragged what was left of me home that night and figured out where I'd been if the big maple hadn't spread its branch just as wide as it did, or if the snake had hit my leg 'stead of my britches. When I took my bearings and saw where I was at, the thing that really hurt me worse was that if I'd gone either down or up, I hadn't done anything for Lily but give her a worse horror than she had, of being got by them orphings home people, when I should have made her safe forever. I took Peter to the barn and told him just how it was, 'cause I felt mighty queer. I wasn't so sure that one scratch on my leg that looked ugly mightn't have been the snake striking through the cloth and dosing me some. I was so sick and swelled up it turned out to be yellow jackets, but it might have been snakes, and I was a little upset. As man to man, I asked him what I ought to do for my family 'fore I took any more risks. A body would have thought the jolt the box gave me would have been enough, but it wasn't. It took the snake and the quicksand to just real right wake me up. First I was some sore on Junior, but pretty quick I saw how funny it was, so I got over it. He should have had his neck broken. "Whoop, whoop, back up," cautioned Mickey. "Nothing of the kind. You ain't figuring on the starving, the beating, being knocked senseless, robbed of all his clothes twice, and landing in the morgue with the cleaning house victims." Gee, Junior had reasons for his grouch. Douglas Bruce suddenly began to laugh wildly. That's what I told you," said Mickey. "Well, that night I laid the case before Peter, out on the hay wagon in the barnyard, so moon white you could have read the Herald. The cattle grunting satisfied all around us, katydids insisting on it emphatic, crickets chirping, and the old rooster calling off the night watches same as he did for that first Peter who denied his Lord. I thought about that as I sat and watched the big fellows slowly whittling the rack, and once in a while putting in a question. And when I told him all there was to tell, he said this. He said, sure, Lily was mine, and I had a perfect right to keep her. But the law might butt in, 'cause there was a law we couldn't evade that could step in and take her any day. He said, too, that if she had to go to the hospital sudden, first question a surgeon would ask was who were her parents, and if she had none, who in their place could give him a right to operate. He said, while she was mine, and it was my right and my job, the law and the surgeon would say no, 'cause we were not related, and I was not of age. He said there were times when the law got its paddle in and went to foolin' with red tape, it let a sick person lay and die while it decided what to do. He said he'd known a few just exactly such cases. So to keep the law from making a fool of itself, as it often did, we'd better step in and fix things to suit us before it ever got a showdown." "What did he do?" asked Douglas Bruce eagerly. "Well, after we talked it over, we moved up to the back porch, and Peter explained to Ma, only she doesn't know it, and she said for him to do exactly what his conscience and his God dictated. That's where his namesake put it over that first Peter. Our Peter said, well, if God is to dictate my course, you remember what he said about suffering the little children to come to him? And we are commanded to be like him, so there's no way to twist it, but that it must suffer them to come to us, he said. Ma, she spoke quick and said, well, we've got them. Peter said, yes, we've got them. Now the question is whether we keep them or send them to an orphan's home. The nice lady said faster than I can tell you, Peter Harding, I'm ashamed of you. There's no question of that kind. There's never going to be. Well, don't get het up about it, said Peter. I knew all the time there wasn't. I just wanted to hear you say so, plain and emphatic. So far as I'm concerned, my way is clear as noonday sun, said Peter. Then you go first thing in the morning and adopt them both, said Ma. Lily will make Mary just as good a sister as she could ever have, said she, and then she reached over and put her arms right around me, and she said, And if you think I'm going to keep on trying to run this house without Mickey, you're mistaken." I began to cry, 'cause I had had a big day, and I was shaken on my feet anyway. Then Peter said, "Have you figured it out to the end? Is it to be till they are of age, or forever?" She just gripped tighter and said fast as words can come, "I say make it forever, and share alike. I'm willing if you are." Peter said, "I'm willing. They'll pay their way any place. Forever and share alike is my idea. Do you agree, Mickey?" "Exactly what do you mean?" I asked. And Peter told me it was making me and Lily both his, just as far as the law could do it. We could go all the farther we wanted to ourselves. He said it meant him getting the same for me and Lily as he did for his own, and leaving us the same when he died. I told him he needn't do that. If he'd just keep off the old orphans' home devil, that's had me scared all my days. I'd tend to that. So now me and Lily belong to Peter. He's our protectorate." "Mickey, why didn't you tell me?" asked Douglas. "Why didn't you want me to adopt you?" "Well, so far as adopting is concerned," said Mickey, "I ain't crazy about it with anybody. But that's the law you men have made. The boy must obey it, even if he'd rather be skinned alive. And when he knows it ain't right or fair, that's the law. I was up against it, and I didn't know but I did have the snake. And Peter was on hand and made the offer, and he was grand and big about it. I don't love him any more than I do you, but I've just this minute discovered that it ain't in my skin to love any man more than I do Peter, so you'll have to get used to the fact that I love him just as well, and say, Mr. Bruce, Peter is the finest man you ever knew. If you'll come out and get acquainted, you'll just be tickled to have him in the golf club, and to come to his house, and to have him at yours. His nice lady is exactly like Miss Winton, only older. Say, she and Peter will adopt you too, if you say so, and between us, just as man to man, Peter is a regular life-saver. If you got a chance, you better catch on. No telling what you might want of him." "Mickey, you do say the most poignant things," cried Douglas. "I'd give all I'm worth to catch on to Peter right now, and cling for much more than life. But what I started I must finish, and Peter isn't here." "Well, what's the matter with me?" asked Mickey. "Have you run into the yellow jackets too? 'Cause if you had, I'm ahead of you, and I know what to do. Just catch on to me." "Think you are big enough to serve as a straw for a drowning man?" inquired Douglas. "Sure, I'm big enough to establish a protectorate over you this minute. The weight of my body hasn't anything to do with the size of my heart, or how fast I can work my brains and feet if I must." "Mickey," said Douglas despairingly, "it's my candid opinion that no one can save me right now." Mickey opened his lips and showed that his brain was working by shutting them abruptly on something that seemed very much as if it had started to be sure. "Is that so?" he substituted. "Yes, I'm in the sweat box," admitted Douglas, "and it's uncomfortable and weakening. What's the first thing we must do to get you out?" "What I'm facing now is the prospect that there's no way for me to get out, or for my friends to get me out," admitted Douglas. "I wish I had been plowing corn, Mickey." The boy's eyes were gleaming. He was stepping from one foot to the other as if the floor burned him. "Gosh, we must saw wood!" he cried. "You go on and tell me. I've been up against a lot of things. Maybe I can think up something. Honest, maybe I can." "No, Mickey, there's nothing you or any one can do," said Douglas. "A miracle is required now, and miracles have ceased." "Oh, I don't know!" exclaimed Mickey. "Look how they've been happening to me and Lily right along. I can't see why one mightn't be performed for you just as well. I wish you wouldn't waste so much time. I wish you hadn't spent an hour fooling with what I was telling you. That would keep. I wish you'd give me a job and let me get busy." Douglas looked at the valiant figure and smiled forlornly. "I'd gladly give you the job of saving me, my dear friend," he said, "but the fact is, I haven't a notion of how to go to work to achieve salvation." "Is somebody else getting ahead of you?" "Not that I know of. No, I don't think so. That isn't the trouble," said Douglas. "I do wish you'd just plain tell me," said Mickey. "Now that I got the Protectorate all safe over Lily, I'd do anything for you. Maybe I could think up some scheme. I'm an awful schemer. I wish you'd trust me. You needn't think I'd blab. Come on now." Suddenly Douglas Bruce's long arms stretched across the table before him. His head fell on them, and big shuddering sobs shook him. Mickey's dance steps became 6 inches high, and in desperation he began polishing the table with his cap. Then he reached one wiry little hand and commenced rubbing Douglas up and down the spine. The tears were rolling down his cheeks, but his voice was even and clear. "Aw, come on now," he begged. "Cut that out. That won't help none." "What shall I do? Shall I call Mr. Minturn? Shall I get Miss Leslie on the wire?" Bruce considered the propositions. Then he arose and began walking the floor. "Yes," he said. "Yes. Bearer of morning, call her." Mickey ran to the telephone. "In a minute." "Here she is," he announced. "Shall I go?" "No, stay right where you are." "Hello, Leslie? Are you all right?" "I'm sorry to say I am not. I'm up against a proposition I don't know how to handle." "Why, just this. You remember your father told me, in your presence, that if, in the course of my investigations, I reached his office, I was to wait until he got back?" "Yes, I thought you'd remember. You know the order of the court gave me access to the records, but the officials whose books I have gone over haven't been pleased about it. Although reflection would have told them if it hadn't been I, it would have been some other man. But the point is this: I'm almost at the finish, and I haven't found what obviously exists somewhere. I'm now up to the last office, which is your father's. The shortage either has to be there or in other departments outside those I was delegated to search, so that further pursuit will be necessary. 2 or 3 times officials have suggested to me that I go over your father's records first, as an evidence that there was no favoritism. Now I have reached them and this proposition. If I go ahead in his, as I have in other offices, I disobey his express order. If I do not, the gang will set up a howl in tomorrow morning's paper, and they will start an investigation of their own. Did you get anything from him this morning, Leslie? Not for 4 days? And he's a week past the time he thought he would be back? I see. Leslie, what shall I do? In my morning's mail there is a letter from the men whose records I have been over, giving me this ultimatum: begin on Winton's office immediately, or we will. Tell them to go ahead? But Leslie. Yes, I know. But Leslie. Yes? You are ordering me to tell them that I propose to conduct the search in his department as I did theirs? And if they will not await his return from this business trip, they are perfectly free to go ahead? You are sure that is the thing you want said? But Leslie. Yes, I know. But Leslie, it is disobeying him. And it's barely possible there might be a traitor there. Better men than he have been betrayed by their employees. I admit I'm all in. I wish you would come and bring your last letter from him. We'll see if we can't locate him by wire. It's an ugly situation. Of course, I didn't think it would come to this. Yes, I wish you would. If you say so, I will. But... All right then, come at once. Goodbye. Douglas turned to his desk, wrote a few hasty lines, and said to Mickey, "Deliver that to Muller at the City Hall." Mickey took the envelope and went racing. In half the time he would have used in going to the City Hall, he was in the Herald Building, making straight for the offices of the editor. Mr. Chaffner was standing with a group of men earnestly discussing some matter, when his eye was attracted by Mickey. Directly in range, and with the tip of his index fingers, he was cutting in air letters plainly to be followed: S.O.S. Chaffner nodded slightly, and continued his talk. A second later he excused himself, and Mickey followed to the private room. "Well?" he shot at the boy. "Our submarine has sunk our own cotton." "Humph!" said Chaffner. "I've known for 2 weeks it was heading your way. Just what happened?" Mickey explained, and produced the letter. Chaffner reached for it. Mickey drew back. "Why, I wouldn't dare to do just that," he said. but I know that's what's in it, because I heard what he said, and by it you could tell what she said. I've told you every word, and you said the other day you knew. Please tell me if I should deliver this letter." "If you want to give me a special with the biggest scoop of 10 years," said Schaffner, "and ruin Douglas Bruce, and disgrace the Wintons, take it right along." "Ah, gee!" wailed Mickey, growing ghastly. "Ah, gee, Mr. Schaffner, why, you can't do that! Not to them! Why, they're the nicest folks! And 'tain't 2 weeks ago I heard Miss Leslie say to Mr. Bruce, right in our office, 'Losing money I could stand, disgrace would kill me.' You can't kill her, Mr. Schaffner. Why, she's the nicest and the prettiest. 'Twas her found me and sent me to the boss, like I told you. Honest it was. Why, you can't. You just can't. Why, Mr. Schaffner, I can see by your nice eyes you can't. Ah, gee, come on, now." Mickey's chin hooked over the editor's elbow. His small head was against his arm. His eyes were dripping tears, but his voice, controlled and steady, were entreating. The editor of a big city daily does not give up a scoop like that without a struggle. Mr. Schaffner had his. The boy clung to him and implored. "You know there's a screw loose somewhere," explained Mickey. "You know darling old Daddy could never have done it. And if somebody under him has gone wrong, maybe he could make it up, if he were here and had an hour or so. That day Miss Leslie said he should give all he had for his friend, and he could have all of hers. If she'd be willing for the money to go for her dear old Daddy's friend, course she'd be glad to use it for her Daddy. And she's got a lot from her mother, and maybe Daddy has sold the land he went to sell, and all of that ought to be enough. And if it isn't, I know who will help them, honest I do." "Who, Mickey?" demanded Mr. Schaffner instantly. "Mr. Minturn, Mr. James Minturn," said Mickey. "He's Mr. Bruce's best friend, and he told me he would do anything for Miss Leslie, that day right after I saw you, for if his home ever came right again, it would be 'cause she made it, and she did make it, and it is right, and he's so crazy happy he can't hardly keep on the floor. Course he'd pay Miss Leslie back. He said he would. He's the nicest man." "Isn't your world rather full of nice men, Mickey?" Mickey renewed his grip. His eyes were pleading. The white light on his brow was shining. His voice was irresistibly sweet. "You just bet my world is full of nice men, packed like sardines. But they'll all scrooge up a little and make room for you on the top layer among the selects. Come on, now. Wrestle for your place before we revolve and leave you. All your life you'll be sorry if you make that scoop, and kill Miss Leslie and shame darling old Daddy, and ruin my boss. Oh, I say, Mr. Schaffner, you can't. You can't ever sleep nights again if you do. They haven't ever done anything to you. You'll be the nicest man of all, if you'll tell me what to do. 'Twon't take you but a second, 'cause you know. Oh, tell me, for the love of God, tell me, Mr. Schaffner. You'll be the nicest man I know if you'll tell me." The veteran editor looked down in Mickey's compelling eyes. He laid his hand on the lad's brow just where it was the whitest, and said, "That would be worth the price of any scoop I ever pulled off, Mickey. Are you going to be a lawyer, or write that poetry for me?" "If I'd ever thought of law, this would cook me," said Mickey. "Poetry it is, as soon as I earn enough to pay for finding out how to do it right." "And when you find out, will you come on my staff and work directly under me?" asked Mr. Schaffner. "Sure," promised Mickey. "I'd rather do it than anything else in the world. I've got a life interest in the Herald. It would suit me fine. That is, if you're coming in among my nice men." Mr. Schaffner held out his hand. "This is going to cost me something in prestige and in cash," he said. "But Mickey, you make it worth while. Here are your instructions. Don't deliver that letter. Cut for Minturn and give it to him, and tell him if he wants me to call any time inside an hour, and that he hasn't longer than noon to make good. Say just that to him, he'll understand. If you can't beat a taxi on foot, take one. Have you money?" "Yes," said Mickey. "But just suppose he isn't there and I can't find him." "Then find his wife and tell her to call me." "All right. Thanks, boss. You're simply great." Mickey took the taxi and convinced the driver he was in a hurry. He danced in the elevator, ran down the hall, and into Mr. Minturn's door. Then he stopped abruptly, for he faced Miss Winton and Mrs. Minturn, and her paling face told Mickey that he was stamped on her memory as she was on his. He pulled off his cap, bowed to them, and spoke to Mr. Minturn. "Could I see you a minute?" he asked. "Certainly. Step this way. Excuse us, ladies." Mickey showed the letter, told what had caused it to be written, and that he had gone to Mr. Chuffner instead of delivering it, and what instructions had been given him there. Mr. Minturn picked up the telephone and called Mr. Chuffner. When he got him, he merely said, "This is Minturn. What's the amount, and where does he bank his funds?" "Thank you very much indeed." Then he looked at Mickey. "Till noon, did you say?" "Yes," cried Mickey breathlessly, "and 'tisn't so long." "No," said Mr. Minturn, "it isn't. Ask Mrs. Minturn if I may speak with her a moment." "Shall I come back or stay there?" inquired Mickey. "Come back," said Mr. Minturn. "I may need you." Mickey stood before Mrs. Minturn. "Please will you speak with Mr. Minturn a minute?" "Excuse me, Leslie," said the lady, rising and walking beside Mickey as she entered the room. There she turned to him. "I remember you very well," she said with a steady voice. "You needn't shrink from me. I've done all in my power to atone. It will never be possible for me even to think of forgiving myself. But you'll forgive me, won't you?" "Sure! Why, lady, I'm awful sorry for you." "I'm sorry for myself," she said. "What was it you wanted, Mr. Minturn?" "Suppose you tell Mrs. Minturn about both your visits here," suggested Mr. Minturn to Mickey. "Sure!" said Mickey. "You see, it was like this, lady. This morning Mr. Bruce's head is down, and if he doesn't get help before noon, he and Miss Leslie and all those nice people are in trouble. I thought Mr. Minturn ought to know, so I slipped in and told him." "What is the trouble, lad?" asked Mrs. Minturn. "Why, you see, Miss Leslie's darling old daddy is one of the city officials, and of course Mr. Bruce left him till last, because he would have staked his life he'd find the man he was hunting before he got to his office, and he didn't." "What, James?" said the lady, turning hurriedly. "Tell her about it, Mickey," said Mr. Minturn calmly. "Well, there ain't much to tell," said Mickey. "My boss, he just kept stacking up figures. 2 or 3 times he thought he had his man, and then he'd strike a balance, and the men whose record he searched kept getting madder, and Mr. Winton went west to sell some land. Some way he's been gone a week longer than he expected, and my boss is all through except him. Now the other men say if he doesn't begin on Mr. Winton's books right away, they will, and he told my boss not to till he got back. A while ago I went in the Herald office talking to Mr. Chuffner, whose papers I've sold since I started, and I was telling him what nice friends I had, and how Mr. Bruce and Miss Leslie were engaged, and he liked to eat me up. When I couldn't see why, he told me about investigations he had his men, like I'm going to make, and sometimes they get a scoop on the men appointed to do the job, and he told me he had a scoop on this, and if I saw trouble coming toward my boss, I was to tell him, and maybe, he didn't say sure, but maybe he'd do something." "Oh, James!" cried Mrs. Minturn. "Wait, dear. Go on, Mickey," said Mr. Minturn. "Well," said Mickey, "the elevated jumped the track this morning when my boss got a letter saying if he didn't go on at once with Mr. Winton's office, somebody else would, and the people who have been in the air ever since are due to land at noon, and it's pretty quick now, and they are too nice for any use. Did you ever know finer people?" "No, I never did," said Mrs. Minturn. "But James, I don't understand. Tell me quickly and plainly." "Chuffner just gave me the figures," he said, holding over a slip of paper. "If that amount is in Mr. Winton's credit on his account with the city at the Universal Bank before noon, nothing at all. It's not disgrace for them, and I started it by putting Bruce on the case. I'll raise as much as I can, but I can't secure enough by that time without men knowing it. Mr. Winton has undoubtedly gone to try to secure what he needs, but he's going to be too late. There never has been a worse time to raise money in the history of this country." "But if money is the trouble," said Mrs. Minturn, "you said you never would touch what I put in your name for yourself. Why not use it for him?" If that isn't enough, I will gladly furnish the remainder. That I'm not a stranded, forsaken woman is due to Leslie Winton. All I have wouldn't be big enough price to pay for you and my boys and my precious home. Be quick, James." Mr. Minturn was calling the Universal Bank. Mickey and Mrs. Minturn waited anxiously. They involuntarily drew together, and the woman held the boy in a close grip, while her face alternately paled and flushed, and both of them were breathing short. "I want the cashier," Mr. Minturn was saying. "Don't his voice just make you feel like you were on the Rock of Ages?" whispered Mickey. Mrs. Minturn smilingly nodded. "Hello, Mr. Freeland. This is Miss Minturn talking. James Minturn. You will remember some securities I deposited with you not long ago? I wish to use a part of them to pay a debt I owe Mr. Winton. Kindly credit his account with—" "Oh, he's there in the bank? Well, never mind then. I didn't know he was back yet. Let it go. I'll see him in person. And you might tell him that his daughter is at my office." "Yes, thank you." "No, you needn't say anything about that to him. We'll arrange it ourselves. Good-bye." "Now where am I at?" demanded Mickey. "I don't think you know, Mickey," said Mr. Minturn, "and I'm sure I don't. But I have a strong suspicion that Mr. Winton will be here in a few minutes, and if his mission has been successful, his face will tell it, and if he's in trouble, that will show, and then we will know what to do. Mr. Bruce would like to know he is here, and at the bank, I think." "I'll go tell him right away," said Mickey. Douglas Bruce was walking the floor when Mickey entered. "You delivered the letter?" he cried. Mickey slowly shook his head and produced it. "You didn't?" shouted Bruce. "You didn't! Thank God! Oh, thank God you didn't!" "Ah!" protested Mickey. "Why didn't you?" demanded Douglas. "Well, you see," said Mickey, "me and Mr. Chuffner of the Herald were talking a while ago about some poetry I'm going to write for his first page soon now. I've always sold his papers, you know, and I sort of belong. And I happened to tell him I was working for you and how fine you were, and about your being engaged to Miss Leslie, and he seemed to kind of think you were heading for trouble. He just plain said so. I was so scared I begged him not to let that happen, and I told him how everything was, and finally I got him to promise that if you did get into trouble, he'd help you. At least he almost promised. You see, he's been a newspaper man so long he eats it and sleeps it and breathes it all day, and he had a scoop." "He had a scoop?" repeated Douglas. "Yes, a great big one, biggest one in 10 years," said the boy. "He loved it so that me trying to pry him loose from it was about like working to move the Iroquois building with a handspike. All he promised that first trip was that if I'd come and tell him when I saw you'd got into trouble, he'd see what he could do." "Wanted to pump you for material for his scoop, I suppose," commented Douglas. "Whoop, whoop, back up," warned Mickey. "He didn't pump me a little bit, and he didn't try to. He told me nearly 3 weeks ago just what would happen about now, as he had things doped out, and they have. I didn't think that letter should be delivered this morning, 'cause you had no business in darling old Daddy's office if he said stay out." In came Mickey's best flourish. "Why, he mightn't have been ready!" he exclaimed. "He had his friend to help you, remember? I heard Miss Leslie tell you he did, and she told him to. She told you he could have what she had, you remember, of course. He might have had to use some of his office money real quick to save a friend that he had to save, if it took all he had and all Miss Leslie had, and that was right. I asked you the other day if a man might use the money he handled, and you said yes, he was expected to, if he had his books straight and the money in the bank when his time for accounting came. 'Tain't time to account yet, but you was doing this investigating among his bunch, and so I guess if he did use the money for his friend, he had to go on that trip he was too busy to take Miss Leslie, and sell something or do something to get ready for you. That's all right, ain't it?" "Yes, if he could do it," conceded Douglas. "Well, he can," triumphed Mickey. "He can. He can just as easy, 'cause he's down at the Universal Bank doing it right now." "What?" cried Douglas. "Sure," said Mickey, back on time. "At the bank fixing things so you can investigate all you want to. What's the matter with darling old Daddy? He's all right. Go on and write your letter over, and tell them anxious, irritated gents that you'll investigate till the basement and cupola are finished, just as soon as you make out the reports you are figuring up now. That will give you time to act independent, and it will give Daddy time to be ready for you." "Mickey, what if he didn't get the land sold?" wavered Douglas. "What if his trip was a failure?" "Well, that's fixed," said Mickey, stepping from one toe to the other. "Don't ruffle your down about that. If darling old Daddy has bad luck, and for staking his money and his honor on his friend, he's going to get picked clean and dished up himself. Why, it's fixed so he isn't, see?" "It's fixed?" marveled Douglas. "Surest thing you know!" cried Mickey. "You've had your Protectorate all safe a long time and didn't even know it." "Mickey, talk fast! Tell me, what do you mean?" "Why, that was fixed 3 weeks ago, I tell you," explained Mickey. "When Mr. Chaffner said you would strike trouble, I wasn't surprised any, 'cause I've thought all the time you would. And when you did, I went skimming to him, and he told me not to deliver that letter, and he was grand, just something grand. He told me what had to happen to save you, so I kept the letter and scuttled for Mr. James Minturn, who started all this, and I just said to him, 'Chickens home to roost,' or words like that. He got on the wire with Chaffner, and instead of giving them that scoop to all Multiopolis and the whole world, he gave Mr. Minturn a few figures on a scrap of paper that he showed to his nice lady. Gosh, you wouldn't ever believe she was a nice lady, or could be. But honest, Mr. Bruce, me and her has been holding hands for half an hour while we planned to help you out. And say, she's so nice, she's just peachy, and she's the same woman. I don't know how that happens, but she's the same woman who fired me and that nice lady from Plymouth, and now she ain't the same, and these are the words she said: 'All I have on earth would not be enough to pay Leslie Winton for giving you back to me and my boys and my precious home.' Precious home! Do you get that? After her marble palace, where she is now must look like a cottage on the green to her, but precious home is what she said, and she ought to know." "Mickey, go on. You were saying that Mr. Chaffner gave Mr. Minturn some figures?" prompted Douglas. "Yes," said Mickey. "His precious scoop, and Mr. Minturn showed her, and she said just as quick to put that amount to Mr. Winton's credit at the Universal Bank, so he called the bank to tell them. When he got the cashier, he found that darling old Daddy was there that minute." "Was there?" cried Douglas. "Was there," repeated Mickey. "So Mr. Minturn backed water, and then he told the cashier he needn't mention to Mr. Winton that he was going to turn over some securities he had there to pay a debt he owed him, 'cause now that he was home, they could fix it up between themselves. And he told the cashier to tell Mr. Winton that Miss Leslie was in his office. He said Daddy would come to her the minute he could, and that if he was happy and all right, it meant that he had sold his land and made good, and if he was broke up, we would know what to do about putting the money to his credit. The nice lady said to put a lot more than he needed, so that if they did investigate, they could see he was all right and he had plenty. See? Mr. Minturn said we could tell the minute we saw—" "Well, young man, can you?" inquired a voice behind them. With the same impulse, Douglas and Mickey turned to find Mr. Winton and Leslie standing far enough inside the door to have heard all that had been said, and obviously keeping quiet to hear it. A slow red crept over Mickey's fair face. Douglas sprang to his feet, his hand outstretched and words of welcome on his lips. Mr. Winton put him aside with a gesture. "I asked this youngster a question," he said, "and I'm deeply interested in the answer. Can you?" Mickey stepped forward and took one long, straight look into the face of the man before him, and then his exultant laugh trilled as the notes of Peter's old bobolink bird on the meadow fence. "Surest thing you know!" he cried in ringing joy. "You're tired, and you need washing and sleep, and a long rest, but there isn't anything sneaking in your eye. There isn't any glistening green look on your face. It's been with you just like I told Mr. Chaffner it's in the Bible. Only with you, it's been even more than a man laying down his life for his friend. It was a near squeak, but you made it. Gee, you made it. I should say I could tell." Mr. Winton caught Mickey and lifted him from his feet. "God made a jewel after my heart when he made you, lad," he said. If you haven't got a father, I'm an insistent candidate for the place." "Gee, you're the nicest man," said Mickey. "If I was out with a telescope searching for a father, I'd make a home run for you. But you see, I'm fairly well fixed. Here's my boss, too fine to talk about, that I work for to earn money to keep me and my family. There's Peter, better than gold, who's annexed both me and my child. There's Mr. Chuffner, punching me up every time I see him about my job for him, soon as I finish school. I'd like you for a father, only I'm crazy about Peter. Just you come and see Peter, and you'll understand." "I'll be there soon," said Mr. Winton. "I have reasons for wanting to know him thoroughly. And by the way, how do you do, Douglas? How is the great investigation going?" "Fine. I'm glad to hear it. Push it with all your might, and finish up so we can have a month on Atwater without coming back and forth. I feel as if I'd need about that much swimming to make me clean, as the young man here suggests. Traveling over the West in midsummer is neither cool nor cleanly, but it's great when things sell as ours did. Land seems to be moving, and there's money under the surface. Nobody has lost so much, and they are only economizing. We must do that ourselves, but Swain and I are both safe, so we shall enjoy a few years of work to recoup some pretty heavy losses. We're not worth what we were, but we are even, with a home base, the love of God big in our hearts, and doubly all right, since if we couldn't have righted ourselves, our friends would have saved us, thanks to this little live wire on my left." "Oh, Daddy, if you'd searched forever, you couldn't have found a better name for Mickey," cried Leslie. "Come on, Douglas, let's go home and rest." "Just as soon as I write and start Mickey with a note," said Douglas. "Go ahead, I'll be down soon." He turned to his desk, wrote a few lines, and sealing them, handed the envelope to the waiting boy. "City Hall," he said. "And Mickey, I see the whole thing. It will take some time to figure just what I do owe you." "Aw, go on," broke in Mickey, backing away. "Mickey, we'll drive you to take the note, and then you come with us," said Douglas. "Thanks, but it would try my nerves," said Mickey, "and I must help Peter move in the pump." End of chapter 19. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Michael O'Halloran by Jean Stratton-Porter. Chapter 20, Mickey's Miracle. I'm dead against bunching children in squads. If rich folks want to do something worthwhile with their money, they can do it by each family taking as many orphans as they can afford, and raising them personal. See? Mickey. That night, Mickey's voice, shrill in exuberant rejoicing, preceded him down the highway, and the Hardings, all busy working out their new plans for comfort, understood that something unusually joyous had happened. Peaches sat straighter in her big pillow-piled chair, leaned forward, and smilingly waited. "Ain't he happy soundin'?" she said to Mrs. Harding, who sat near her sewing. "I guess he thought out the best poetry piece yet. Maybe this time it will be good enough for the first page of the Herald." "Young as he is, that's not likely," said the literal woman. "There's no manner of doubt in my mind but that he can do great newspaper work when he finishes his education and makes his start. But I think Mr. Bruce will use all his influence to turn him toward law." "Mr. Douglas Bruce is a swell gentleman," said Peaches, "and me and Mickey just loves him for his niceness to us. But we got that all settled. Mickey is going to write the poetry piece for the first page of the Herald. That's our paper. And then we are going to make all my pieces into a beautiful book, like I got it started here." Peaches picked up a small notebook, scrupulously kept, and lovingly glanced over the pages, on each of which she had induced Mickey to write in his plainest script one section of her nightly doggerel. and if he failed from the intense affairs of the day, she left a blank page for him to fill later. Taken together, the remainder of her possessions were as nothing to Peaches compared with that book. Not an hour of the day passed that it was not in her fingers. Every line of it she knew by heart, and she learned more from it than all of Mickey's other educational efforts. Peter scraped a piece of fine black walnut furniture free from the accumulated varnish of years, and ran an approving hand over the smooth, dark surface, seasoned with long use. He smiled at her, and she smiled back, and fell into a little chant that had been on her lips much of the time of late. "You know, Peter, we know somepin we won't tell." Peter nodded and beamed on her. "Just listen to that boy, Peter. He must be perfectly possessed," said Nancy. "He didn't ever sound so glad before," cried the child eagerly. Mickey came up the walk radiant. He divided a smile between Mrs. Harding and Peter, and bowed low before Peaches as he laid a package at her feet. Then he struck an attitude of exaggerated obeisance and recited, "Days like this I'm tickled silly when I see my August Lily. No other fellow, dude or gawk, owns a flower that can laugh and talk." Peaches immediately laughed, and so did all of them. "Peter," asked Mickey, "were you ever so glad that you thought you would bust wide open?" "I was," said Peter, "and I am this minute." "Would you mind specifying circumstances?" "Not a bit," said Peter. "First time was when Ma said she'd marry me, and I got my betrothal kiss. And second was the day she said she'd forgive my years of selfish dunderheadedness and start over. Now you, Mickey, what's yours?" "The great investigation is over, so far as our commission goes," answered Mickey. "Multiopolis isn't robbed where she was sure she was. Her accounts balance in the departments we've gone over. Nobody gets the slick face, the glass eye, the lawn-mower on his cocoanut, or dons the candy soup from our work. But some folks I love had a near squeak, and I got a month vacation. Think of that, Miss Lily Peaches O'Halloran! Gee, let's get things fixed up here and have a party to show the neighboring gentlemen what's coming to them, before the weather gets so cold they won't have time to finish their jobs this fall. Some of them will squirm, but we don't care. Some of them will think they won't do it, but they will. Kiss me, Lily, hug me tight, and let me go dig on the furnace foundation till I sweat this out of me." When the children were sleeping that night, he sat on the veranda and told Mrs. Harding and Peter exactly what he thought wise to repeat of the day's experience, and no more, so that when he finished, all they knew was that the investigation was over, so far as Mr. Bruce was concerned. Mickey had a vacation and was a happy boy. As she came to dinner the next day, Mary laid a bundle of mail beside her father's plate, and when he saw it, Peter, as was his custom, reached for the Herald to read the war headlines. He opened the paper, gave it a shake, stared at it in amazement, scanned a few lines, and muttered, "Well, for Lord's sake!" Then he glanced over the sheets at Mickey and back again. The family arose and hurried to a point of vantage at Peter's shoulder, while he spread the paper wide and held it high so that all of them could see. Enclosed in a small ruled space, they read, "Sacred to the memory of the biggest scoop that ever fail in Mr. Chaffner's soup, and was pitched by this nicest editor man where it belonged, in the garbage can, to please his friend Michael O'Halloran. Whoop, fellows, whoop for the drownded scoop that departed this life and our editor's soup. All together, boys, scoop, soup, whoop!" They rushed at Mickey and shook hands, thumped, patted, and praised him, when a half wail arose to the point of reaching his consciousness. "Mickey, what?" cried Peaches. "Let me take it just a minute, Peter," said Mickey, reaching for the sheet. "Wait a second," suggested Mrs. Harding, picking up a big roll they had knocked to the floor. "This doesn't look like catalogues, and it's addressed to you. Likely they've sent you some of your own." "Now maybe Mr. Chaffner did," said Mickey, almost at the bursting point. Course he is awful busy, the busiest man in the world, I expect, but he might have sent me a copy of my poetry since he used it." With shaking fingers he opened the roll, and there were several copies of the Herald similar to the one Peter held, and on the top of one was scrawled in pencil, "Your place, your desk, and your salary are ready whenever you want to begin work. You can't come too soon to suit me. Chuffner." Mickey read it aloud. "Gee," he said, "I most wish I had education enough to begin right now. I like it. I could just go crazy about that job. Yes, honey, yes, I'm coming." He caught up another paper and hurried across the room, quietly but decidedly closing the door behind him, and when Mary started to follow, Junior interposed. "Better not, Molly," he said. "Mickey wants to be alone with his family for a few minutes. Say, father, ain't there a good many newspaper men worked all their lives and got no such show as that?" "I haven't a doubt," said Peter. "Mickey must have written that and sent it in before he came home yesterday," said Mrs. Harding. "I call it pretty bright. I bet if the truth was told, something went wrong, and he was at the bottom of shutting it up. Don't you call that pretty bright, Pa?" "I guess I'm no fair judge," said Peter. "I'm that prejudiced in his favor that when he said, 'See the cat negotiate the rat out of the barn,' I thought it was smart." "Yes, and it was," commented Junior. "It's been funny for everybody to negotiate all sorts of things ever since that North Pole business, and it was funny for the cat, too. Father, do you think that note really means that Mr. Chuffner would give Mickey a place on his paper, and pay him right now?" "I don't know why Chuffner would write it out and sign his name to it if he didn't mean it," said Peter. "You know he is full of stuff like that," said Junior. "He could do some every day about people other than Peaches if he wanted to. Father, ain't you glad he's in our family? Are you going to tell him to take that job if he asks you?" "No, I ain't," said Peter. "He's too young, and not the book learning to do himself justice, and that place is too grown up and exciting for a boy of his nerve force. Don't you think, Nancy?" "Yes, I do, but you needn't worry," said Mrs. Harding. "Mickey knows that himself. Didn't you hear him say, soon as he read it, that he hadn't the education yet? He's taken care of himself too long to spoil his life now, and he will see it. But I marvel at Chuffner. He ought to have known better, and among us I wonder at Mickey. Where did he get it from?" "Easy," said Peter. "From a God-fearing, intelligent mother, and an irresponsible Irish father, from inborn, ingrained sense of right, and a hand-to-hand scuffle with life in Multiopolis gutters. Mickey is all right, and thank God he's ours. If he does show signs of wanting to go to the Herald office, discourage him all you can, Ma. It wouldn't be good for him yet. No, it wouldn't, but it would be because he needs solid study and school routine to settle him and make him great instead of a clown, as that would at his age. But if you think there is anything in the Herald office that could hurt Mickey, you got another think coming. It wouldn't hurt Mickey, and it might be mighty good for the rest of them. The Herald has more honor and conscience than most. Some of the papers are just disgraceful in what they publish, and then they take back next day, and folks are forced to endure it. Sit up and eat your dinners now. I want to get on with my work." "Mickey, what happened?" begged Peaches, as Mickey came in sight carrying the papers. He was trembling and tensely excited, and her sharp eyes could see it. They rested probingly a second on him and then on the paper. Her lips tightened and her eyes darkened. She stretched out her hand. "Mickey, let me see," she commanded. Mickey knelt beside her and spread out the sheet. Then he took her hand and set a finger on the first letter of his name, and slowly moved along as she repeated the letters she knew best of all, and softly pronounced the name. She knew the Herald, too, and she sat so straight Mickey was afraid she would sprain her back, and lifted her head like a queen, if a queen lifts her head just as high as her neck can possibly stretch, and smiled a cold little smile of supreme self-satisfaction. "Now, Mickey, go on and read what you wrote about me," Her Highness commanded. The collapse of Mickey was sudden and complete. He stared at Peaches, at the paper, opened his lips, thought a lie, and discarded it, shut his lips to pen the lie in for sure, and humbly and contritely waited, a silent candidate for mercy. Peaches had none. To her this was the logical outcome of what she had been led to expect. There was the paper was the Herald, there was the front page, there was Mickey's name. She had no conception of Mickey writing a line which did not concern her. Also, he had expressly stated that all of them and the whole book were to be about her. She indicated the paper and his name, and the condescension of her waiting began to be touched with impatience. "Mickey, why don't you go on and read what it says about me?" she demanded. Mickey saw plainly what must be done, and he was sorry to disappoint her. He gazed at her, and suddenly, for the first time, a wave of something new and undefined rushed through him. This exquisitely delicate and beautiful little highness sitting so proudly straight, and so uncompromisingly demanding that he redeem his promises, made a double appeal to Mickey. Her highness scared him until he was cold inside. He was afraid, and he knew it. He wanted to run, and he knew it. Yet no band of steel could have held him as this bit of white femininity, beginning to glow a soft pink from slowly enriching blood, now held and forever would hold him. And best of all, he knew that. It was in his heart to be a gentleman. There was nothing left save to be one now. He took both Peach's hands and began preparing her gently, as was in his power, for what had to come. "Yes, Flowersy girl," he said, "I'll read it to you, but you won't understand till I tell you." "I always understand," she said sweepingly. "You know how wild-like I came home last night?" explained Mickey. "Well, I had reason. Some folks who have been good to us, and that I love like we love Peter and Ma, had been in awful danger of something that would have made them sore all their lives. And maybe I had some little part in putting it over so it never touched them. Anyway, they thought so, and I was tickled past all sense and reason. It was up to the editor of the Herald to decide, and what he did was what I begged him to. Course, left to himself, he would have done it anyway, after he had time to think." "Mickey, read my poetry piece about me, and then talk," urged Peaches. "Honey, you make me so sick I can't tell you." "Mickey, what's the matter?" Peach's eyes were penetrating, and slowly changing to accusing. She drew a deep breath, and gave him his first cold, unrelenting look. "Mr. Michael O'Halloran," she said in incisive tones, "did you write a poetry piece for the first page of the Herald not about me?" "Well, Miss Chicken," he cried, "I wish you wouldn't talk so much. I wish you'd let me tell you." "I guess you ain't got anything to tell," said Peaches, folding her arms and tilting her chin so high Mickey feared she might topple backward. "I guess I have," shouted Mickey. "I didn't put that there. I didn't mean it to be there. If I'd a put it there and meant it there and knowed it would be there, it would have been about you, of course. Answer me this, miss. Any single time did I ever not do anything that I said I would?" "Nothing but this," admitted Peaches. "There you go again," said Mickey. "I tell you I didn't do this. And when I tell you, I tell true, miss. Get that in your system. If you'd let me explain how it was, you'd see that I didn't have a single thing to do with it." Peaches accomplished a shrug that was wonderful, and with closed lips gazed at the ceiling. Mickey watched her a second, and then he began softly. "Flowersy girl, I don't see what you mean. I don't know why you act like this. I don't know what's to have a tantrum for, when I didn't mean it to be there, and I didn't know it would be there. Honest, I don't." "Go on and read it," she commanded. Mickey obeyed. As he finished, he glanced at her, and she faced him in wonder. "Why, there ain't a damn bit of sense to it!" she cried. "Course there ain't," agreed Mickey. "Course there would be no sense to anything that wasn't about you." "Then what did you put it there in my place for?" "I didn't. I'm trying to tell you," persisted Mickey. Peaches shed 1 degree of royal hauteur. Well, why don't you go on and tell, then? She questioned. Ah! Well, if you don't maneuver to beat a monoplane. I've tried to tell you, and you won't let me. If you stop me again, I'm going to march out of this room and stay till you bawl your eyes red for me. If you go, I'll call Junior, said Peaches instantly. Well, go on and call him. He turned, his heart throbbing, his eyes burning with repressed tears, and the big gulp in his throat audible to Peaches, just as her little wail was to him. He whirled, and dropping on his knees, took her in his arms, and she threw hers around his neck, buried her face against his cheek, and they cried it out together. At last she produced a bit of linen, and mopped Mickey's eyes and face, and then her own. While still clinging to him, she whispered, "Mickey, I'm just about dead to have it be in the Herald, and the front page, and you, and not about me." "Flowersy girl, I'm just as sorry as you are," said Mickey. "It was this way. I was just crazy over things our editor man did that saved our dear boss and the lovely moonshine lady who gave you your precious child, and her darling old daddy from such awful trouble it would have just killed them. Honest it would, Lily. When our editor man was so great and nice and did what he didn't want to do at all, I went sort of wild like, and when I was off for the day and got on the streets, everything pulled me his way. I was anxious just to see him again, and if I'd done what I'd wanted to, I'd have gone to the Herald office and knelt down and said, 'Thank you, oh, thank you,' and kissed his feet. But of course I knew men didn't do like that, and it would have shamed him. But I had to do something or bust, and I went running for the office like flying, and my mind got whirling round, and that stuff began to come. I slipped in and back to his desk, like I may if I want to, and there he sat. He had a big white sheet just like this before it is printed, spread out, and a pencil in his fingers, and about a dozen of his best men were crowding round with what they had for the paper today. I've told you how they do it, often, and when I edged up, some of the men saw me. They knew I had a pass to him, so they stepped back just till he said, 'Well, boys, who's got some big stuff to fill the space of our departed scoop?' That departed word means lost, gone, and it's what they say about people when they go for good." Then he looked up to see who would speak first, and noticed me. "Oh, there is the little villain who scooped our scoop right now," he said. "Let's make him fill the space he's cut us out of." I thought it was a joke, but I wasn't going to have all that bunch of the swellest smarties who work for him put it clear over me. I've kidded back with my paper men too long for that. So I stepped back and shot it at him. That's what's printed there. And when I got to the end and invited the fellows to whoop, Lily, you could have heard them a mile. I saw they were starting for me, and I just slung in a 'Thank you, something awful, boss,' and ducked through and between and cut for life, 'cause if they'd a got me, I might have been there yet. They are the nicest men on earth, but they get a little keyed up sometimes, and a kid like me couldn't manage them. Now that's all there it is to it, Lily, honest, cross my heart. I didn't know they would put it there. I didn't know they thought it was good enough. I wouldn't have let them for the life of me if I'd a known they was going to." "You just said it once, Mickey?" inquired Peaches. "Just once, Flowersy girl, fast as I could rattle." "It's twice as long as mine ever are," she said. "I don't see how they 'membered." "Oh, that!" cried Mickey. "Why, honey, that's easy. Those fellows jump onto a thing like chain lightning, and they got a way of writing that is just a lot of little twists and curls, but one means a whole sentence. They call it shorthand, and doing that way they can set down talk as fast as anybody can speak. And there were a dozen of them there with pencils and papers in their fingers. That wasn't anything for them." "Mickey, are you going to learn to write that way?" "Sure," said Mickey. "Before I go to the Herald to take my desk and my 'signment, I've got to know, and you ought to know too, 'cause I always have to bring what I write to you first to see if you like it." "Yes, if the mean old things don't go and steal my place again when you don't know it," protested Peaches. "Why, don't you fret about that," said Mickey. They got away with me this time, but they won't ever again, 'cause I'll be on to their tricks, see? Now say you forgive me, and eat your dinner, 'cause it'll be spoiled. And you must have a good rest, for there's going to be something lovely afterwards. You ain't mad at me any more, Lily?" "No, I ain't mad at you, but I'm just so—" "Whoop, whoop!" cried Mickey, softly applying the palm of his hand. Peaches pulled it away indignantly. So extremely mad at those paper men! Mickey, I don't think I'll ever let you be a Herald man at all if they're going to leave me out like that." "What do you care about an old paper sold on the streets and ground up for buckets, and used to start fires, anyway?" scoffed Mickey. "Why don't you sit up on the shelf in a nice pretty silk dress and be a book lady? I wouldn't be in the papers at all if I were you." "No, and I won't either!" cried Peaches instantly. "Take the old paper and put what you please in it. I shall have all about me in the nice silky covered book on the shelf, so there! You needn't try to make me do anything else, 'cause I shan't, ever." "Course you shan't," agreed Mickey. He went back to the dinner table to find the family finished and gone. He carried what had been left for him to the back porch, and eating hastily, began helping to get things in place. As always, he went to Mrs. Harding for orders. She was a little woman, so very like his mother in size, coloring, speech, and manner, that Mickey could almost forget she was not truly his, when every hour she made him feel her motherly kindness. So from early habit it was natural for him to seek her first, and to do what he could to assist her before he attempted anything else. All the help Peter had from him came when he found no more to do for Mrs. Harding. As he washed the dishes while she sat sewing for the renovation of the house, he said to her, "When you dress Lily for this afternoon, I wish you'd make her just as pretty as you can, and put her very nicest dress on her." "Why, Mickey, is some one coming?" she asked. "I don't know," said Mickey, "but I have a hunch that my boss and Miss Leslie and her father may be out this afternoon. They have been talking about it a long time, and I kept making every excuse I could think up to keep them away." "But why, Mickey?" asked Mrs. Harding, looking at him intently. She paused in her sewing and ran the needle slowly across the curtain material. "Well, for a lot of reasons," said Mickey. "A fellow of my size doesn't often tackle a family, and when he does, if he's going to be square about it, he has got to do a lot of thinking. One thing was that it was hard for me to get Lily out of my head like I first saw her. I guess I couldn't tell you so you'd get a fair idea of how dark, dirty, alone, and little, and miserable she was. Just with all my heart I was ashamed of her folks, and sick sorry for her. But I can't bear for anybody else to be. I didn't want any of them to see her till she was fed and fatted up a lot, and trained till how nice she really is, shows plain. It just hurt me to think of it." Agreed Mrs. Harding, differing emotions showing on her face. "I see, Mickey." "Then," continued Mickey, "I'm sticking sore and mean on one point. I did find her. She is mine. I am going to keep her. Nobody in all this world takes her, nor God in heaven." "Mickey, careful what you say," she cautioned. "I don't mean anything wicked," explained Mickey. "I'm just telling you that nobody on earth can have her, and I'd fight till I'd die with her, before even heaven gets her. I don't mean anything ugly about it. I'm just telling you friendly like how I feel about her." "I see, Mickey," said Mrs. Harding. "Go on." "Well, lots of reasons," said Mickey. "She wasn't used to folks, and they scared her. She was crazy with fear about the orphings' home getting her, and I wasn't any too sure myself. I flagged one swell dame, and like to got caught in a trap and lost her. Then my sunshine nurse helped me all I needed, and not knowing how much women were alike, I didn't care to go rushing in a lot on Lily just to find out. She was a little too precious to experiment with. That home business has been a big, grinning, get-you-any-minute devil peeping round the corner at me ever since mother went. I could dodge him for myself, but I couldn't take any risks for Lily. These orphings' homes ain't no place for children. 'Stead of the law building them and penning the little souls starving for home and love in them, what it should do is to make people who pay the money to run them take the children in their own homes, and love and raise them personal. If every family in the world that has no children would take 2, and them that has would take just 1, all the orphan homes would make good hospitals and schools, and the orphings would be fixed like Lily and I are. Course, I know all folks ain't the same as you and Peter, but in the long run children are safer in homes than they are in squads. Most any kind of a home beats no home at all. You can stake your liberty birds on that." "You surely can," agreed Mrs. Harding. "You just bet," persisted Mickey. "When I didn't know what they would do, I didn't want them pesterin' round, maybe to ruin everything. And when I did, I didn't want them any more, 'cause then I saw their idea would be to take her themselves, and in one day they would have made all I could do look like 30 cents. She was mine, and what she had with me was so much better than what she would have had without me, or if the law got her, that I thought she was doing well enough. I see now she could have had more, but I thought then it was all right." "Now, Mickey, don't begin that," said Mrs. Harding. "What you did was to find her, and without a doubt save her life. At least, if you didn't, you landed her in a fairly decent home where all of us will help you do what you think best for her, and there's small question but we can beat any orphan's home yet in existence. And as for the condition in which I found her, it was growing warm in that room, but I'll face any court in the universe and swear I never saw a cleaner child or one in better condition for what you had to begin on. The Almighty himself couldn't have covered those awful bones with flesh and muscle, and smoothed the bed sores and scars from that little body, and gone much faster training her right, unless he was going back to miracles again. As far as miracles are concerned, I think from what you tell me, and what the child's condition proves, that you have performed the miracle yourself. To the day of my death I'll honor, respect, and love you, Mickey, for the way in which you've done it. I've yet to see a woman who could have done better, and I want you to know it." "I don't know the right words to say to you and Peter," he said. "Never mind that," said Mrs. Harding. "We owe you quite as much, and something we are equally as thankful for. It's an even break with us, Mickey, and no talk of obligations on either side. We prize Junior as he is just now fully as much as you do anything you've gained." Mickey polished the plates and studied Mrs. Harding. Then he spoke again. "There's one more obligation I'm just itching to owe you." "Tell me about it, Mickey," she said. "Well, right in line with what we've been talking of," said Mickey. "Just suppose a big car comes chuffing up here this afternoon, like I have a hunch it will, and all those nice folks so polite and beautifully dressed come to see us. I know you are busy, but I'll work afterward to pay back, if you and Peter will dust up a little. Course I know the upset fix we are in, but just glorify a trifle, and lay off and keep right on the job without a second of letting up, till they are gone, see?" "You mean you don't want to be left alone with them?" "You get me!" cried Mickey. "You get me clearly. I don't want to be left alone with them, for them to put ideas in Lily's head about a nicer car than ours, and a bigger house, and finer dolls and dresses, and going to the city to stay with them on visits, or me going to live with Mr. Winton to be the son he should have found for himself long ago. I guess I have Lily sized up about as close as the next one, and she has got all that is good for her right now. She'd make the worst spoiled kid you ever saw if she had half a chance. What she needs to make a grand woman of her, like you and mother, is clean air, quiet, good food like she's got here, with bone as well as muscle in it, and just enough lessons and child play with children to keep her brains going as fast as her body, and no silly pampering to make her foolish and disagreeable. I know how little and sick she is, but she shan't use it for capital to spoil her whole life. See?" "Through a glass darkly," quoted Mrs. Harding, laughing. "Oh, Mickey, I didn't think it of you. You're deeper than the well." "That's all right," said Mickey, his face flushing. "Often I hear you say, 'Let good enough alone,' My sentiments exactly. Lily is fine, and so am I. Let us alone. If you and Peter will do me the cap-sheaf favor, as he would say, you'll dust up and spunk up, and the very first hint that comes, 'cause it's coming, at the very first hint of how Miss Leslie would love to take care of the dear little darling a while, smash down with the nix. Smash like 60. Keep your eyes and ears open, and if you could, dearest lady, beat them to it. I'd be tickled silly if you could manage that. If you could only tell them how careful she has to be handled and taken care of, and how strangers and many around would be bad for her. Mickey, the minute they see the shape things are in here, it will give them the chance they are after, and they will begin that very thing," she said. "I know it," conceded Mickey. "That's why I'd like to put them off if I could, till we were fixed and quiet again. But at that, their chance isn't so grand. This isn't worrying Lily any. She saw all of it happen. She knows what's going on. What I want, dearest lady, is for you to get on the job and spunk up to them just like you did about Junior going away. I didn't think you'd get through with that, and I know Peter didn't, but you did fine. Now if you and Peter would have a little private understanding and engineer this visit that I sent in the air, so that when you see they are going to offer pressing invitations to take Lily and to take me, and put me at work that I wasn't born to do, if you'd only have a receiver out, and when your wires warn you what's coming down the line, first and beforehand, calm and plain, fix things so the nix wouldn't even be needed. Do you get me, dearest Mother Harding? Do you see?" "That I do," said Mrs. Harding, rising abruptly. "I'll go and speak to Peter at once, and we'll shift these workmen back and quiet them as much as we can. I'll slip on a fresh dress and put some buttermilk in the well, and fix Peaches right away, if she's finished her nap." Mrs. Harding's voice trailed back, telling what she would do as she hastened to Peter. Mickey, with anxious heart, helped all he could, washed and slipped on a fresh shirt, and watched the process of adjusting Peach's hair ribbon. "Now understand, I don't know they're coming," he said. "I just think they will." Because he thought so, for an hour the Hardings' premises wore a noticeable air of expectation. All the family were clean, and purposely keeping so, but the waiting was long, and work was piled high in any direction. Peaches started the return to normal conditions by calling for her slate and beginning to copy her lesson. Mary, with many promises not to scatter her scraps, sat beside the couch and cut bright pictures from the papers. Mickey grew restless and began breaking up the remains of packing cases, while Junior went after the wheelbarrow. Mrs. Harding brought out her sewing, and Peter went back to scraping black walnut furniture. Mickey passed him on an errand to the kitchen and asked anxiously, "Did she tell you?" "Yes," said Peter. "Will you make it a plain case of nobody home, nobody home?" questioned Mickey. "I will," said Peter emphatically. Being busy, the big car ran to the gate before they saw it coming, and Leslie Winton and Douglas Bruce came up the walk together, while Mr. Winton and Mrs. Minturn waited in the car, in accordance with the suggestion from Douglas that the little sick girl must not see too many strange people at once. Mickey went to meet them, and Peaches, waiting, half in fear and wholly in pride, saw Douglas Bruce shake his hand until she frowned lest it hurt, clap him on the back, and cry, "Oh, but I'm proud of you! Say, that was great!" Leslie, purposely dressed to emphasize her beauty, slipped an arm across his shoulders, and drawing him to her, kissed his brow. "Our poet," she said. "Oh, Mickey, hurry! I'm so eager to hear the ones in the book Douglas tells me you are making. Won't you please read them to us?" Mickey blushed and smiled as he led the way. "Just nonsense stuff for Lily," he said. "Nothing but fooling. Only the prayer one, and maybe 2 others." An abrupt movement from Peaches as they advanced made Mrs. Harding glance her way in time to see the first wave of deep color that ever had flooded the child's white face come creeping up her neck and begin tingeing her cheeks, even her forehead. With a swift movement she snatched her poetry book, which always lay with her slate and primer, and thrust it under her pillow. When she saw Mrs. Harding watching her, she tilted her head and pursed her lips in scorn. "Our," she mimicked perfectly. "Our? Wonder whose she thinks he is. Nix on her!" Mrs. Harding, caught surprisedly, struggled to suppress a laugh as she turned to meet her guests. Mickey noticed this. He made his introductions and swiftly thrust Peach's precious child into her arms, warning in a whisper, "You be careful, miss." Peaches needed the reminder. She loved the doll, and she had been drilled so often on the thanks she was to tender for it, that with it in her fingers she thought of nothing else. And her smile as Leslie approached was lovely. She held out her hand, and before Mickey could speak, announced, "Just as glad to see you. Thank you ever so much for my precious child." Nothing more was necessary. Leslie was captivated, and would scarcely make way for Douglas to offer his greeting. Mary ran to call her father, and the visitors seated themselves and tried to say the customary polite things, but each of them watched a tiny, white-clad creature with pink ribbons to match the color in a flawless little face, rounded to the point of delicate beauty, overshadowed by a shower of gold curls, having red lips, and lighted by a pair of big, blue-gray eyes with long, dark lashes. When Mrs. Harding saw both visitors look so intently at Peaches, and intercepted their glance of admiration toward each other, she looked again herself, and then once more. She had not realized that the child had fleshed up so, and the surge of red coloring her face and lips, the light of excitement in her eyes, added to this an indefinable something which that instant explained itself. Peaches spoke with elaborate imperiousness. "Mickey, lovest, come here and bend down your head." Mickey slipped behind Douglas's chair, knelt on one knee, and leaned to see or hear what Peaches desired of him. She drew her handkerchief from her waist ribbon, rubbed it across his forehead, looked at the spot with frowning intentness, rubbed again, and then dropping the handkerchief, laid a hand on each side of his head, bent it to her, and kissed the spot fervently. Then she looked him in the eyes and said with solicitous but engaging sweetness, "Mickey, I do wish you would be more careful what you get on your face." Mickey drew back, thrilled with delight, but extremely embarrassed. "Ah, you fool little kid!" he muttered, and could not look at his friends. Watching, Douglas almost shouted, while the flush deepened on Miss Winton's cheeks. Peter began talking to help the situation, so all of them joined in. "You are making improvements that look very interesting around here," said Douglas to Mrs. Harding. "We are doing our level best to evolve a sanitary, modern home for all of us, and to set an example for our neighbors," she said quietly. "We always got along very well as we were, but lately we have found we could have things much more convenient. And when God gave us 2 more dear children, we needed room for them, and comforts and appliances to take care of our little new daughter right. When we got started, one thing led to another until we were pretty well torn up. But we've saved the best place for her, and the worst is over." "Yes, we are on the finish now," said Peter. "I did think of taking her and going to my sister's," continued Mrs. Harding, "but Peaches isn't accustomed to meeting people, and Mickey and I both thought being among strangers and changing beds and food would be worse for her than the annoyance of remodeling. Then, too, I wanted very much to see the work here done as I desired. At first I was doubtful about keeping her, but she doesn't mind in the least. She even takes her afternoon naps with hammers pounding not so far from her." "Gee, there is no noise and jar here compared to Multiopolis," said Mickey. "She's all right, getting stronger every day." Peaches spread both hands and looked at them critically, back and palm. "They are better," she said. "You ought to seen them when they was so clawy they made Mickey shiver if I touched him. And first thing I wanted to kiss something, or go like Granny did, he wouldn't let me till I cried, and then he made me put it on his forehead long time, till I got so the bones didn't scratch him. Didn't you, Mickey?" "Well, I wish you wouldn't tell everything." "Then I won't," said Peaches, "'cause I'm your family, and I must do what you say, and you are my family, and you must do what I say." "Are you a family?" she questioned Leslie and Douglas. "We hope to be soon," laughed Leslie. "Then," said Peaches, "you can look how we're fixing our house, so you can make yours nice as this. Mickey, I want to show that pretty lady in the automobile my precious child." "Sure," said Mickey. "I'll go tell her. And the man with her is Miss Leslie's father, just like Peter is ours. You want to show him the child, don't you?" "Maybe," said Peaches with a tantalizing smirk. "Miss Chicken, you are getting well too fast," commented Mickey in amazement as he started to the car. Because of what Mr. Winton had said to him the previous day, he composed and delivered this greeting when he reached it. "Lily is asking to show you her precious child, Mrs. Minturn, and I want both of you to see our home and meet our new father and mother. Letting us have them is one thing the law does that makes up a little for the orphans' home most kids get, who have had the bad luck to lose their own folks." "Mickey, are you prejudiced against orphans' homes?" asked Mrs. Minturn as she stepped from the car. "Ain't no name for it," said Mickey. "I'm dead against bunching kids in squads. If rich folks want to do something worth while with their money, they can do it by each family taking as many orphans as they can afford, and raising them personal, see?" "I should say I do!" exclaimed the lady. "I must speak to James about that. We have 2 of our own, and William, but I believe we could manage a few more." "I know one I'd like very much to try," said Mr. Winton, and Mickey never appeared so unconscious. He managed his introductions very well, and again Peaches justified her appellation by being temptingly sweet and conspicuously acid. When Mickey reached Peter in his round of making friends acquainted, he slid his arm through that of the big man and said smilingly, "Nobody is going to mix with Peter's son by blood. See what a fine big chap Junior is? But Peter and I fixed up my sonship with the Almighty, whom my Peter didn't deny when he took me in, and with the judge of the Multiopolis courts, so even if it doesn't show on the outside, I belong, don't I?" Peter threw his left arm around Mickey even as he shook hands with his right. "You surely do," he said, "by law and by love, to the bottom of all our hearts." The visit was a notable success. The buttermilk was cold, the spice cake was fresh, the apples and peaches were juicy, and the improvements highly commendable. Peter was asked if he would consider a membership in the golf club. The playhouse was discussed, and 3 hours later a group of warm friends parted, with the agreement that Mickey was to spend a day the latter part of the week fishing on Atwater. The Hardings smiled broadly. "Well, son, did we manage that to your satisfaction?" asked Peter. "Sure!" said Mickey. "I might have been mistaken in what half of that trip was for, but I think not." "So do I," said Mrs. Harding emphatically. "They were just itching to get their fingers on Peaches, and Mr. Bruce and Mr. Winton both were chagrined over our getting you first." "We feel bad about that too, don't we, Peter?" laughed Mickey. "Well, I would," said Peter, "if it were the other way around. I didn't mind the young fellow. You'll be with him every day, and he'll soon have boys of his own, no doubt. But I feel sorry for Mr. Winton. He looks hungry when he watches you. He could work you into his business fine." "He's all right. He's a nice man," said Mickey. "But I've lived off the Herald all my life, till this summer, and when school is over I go straight to Mr. Chuffner." The Winton car ran to the clubhouse. Sitting in a group, the occupants looked at each other rather foolishly. "Seems to me you were going to bring Peaches right along if you liked her, Leslie," laughed Douglas. "The little vixen," she said, flushing. "Sorry you didn't care for her," he commented. "It is a pity," said Leslie, "but I didn't miss bringing her along any further than Mrs. Minturn missed taking her to the hospital to be examined and treated." "I'll have to go again about that," said Mrs. Minturn. "I just couldn't seem to get at it some way." "No, you just couldn't seem to," agreed Douglas, "and Mr. Winton just couldn't seem to lay covetous hands on Mickey and bear him away to be his assistant any more than I could force him to be my little brother. I hope all of us have a realizing sense that we are permitted to be a good and loyal friends, but we will kindly leave Mickey to his own arrangements, and work out his own salvation and that of his child. And Leslie, I didn't hear you offering to buy any of the quaint old dishes and old furniture you hoped you might pick up there, either." "Heavens!" cried Leslie, half tearfully. "How would anyone go about offering to buy an old platter that was wrapped in a silk shawl and kept in a dresser drawer during repairs? Or ask a man to set a price on old furniture when he was scraping off the varnish of generations and showing you wood grain and coloring with the pride of a veteran collector? I feel so silly. Let's play off our chagrin, and then we'll be in condition for friendship, which is the part that falls to us, if I understand Mickey." "Well, considering the taste I've had of the quality of his friendship, I hope you won't be surprised at the statement that I feel highly honored," said Mr. Winton, leading the way, while the others thoughtfully followed. With 4 days' work, the Harding home began to show what was being accomplished. The song of the housewife carried to the highway, and neighbors passing went home to silent, overworked drudges, and critically examined for the first time stuffy dark kitchens, reeking with steam, heat, and the odor of cooking, and decorated with the grime of years. The little leaven of one home in the neighborhood, as all homes should be, set them thinking, and a week had not passed until people began calling Mrs. Harding to the telephone to explain just what she was doing and why. Men would stop to ask Peter what was going on, and every time he caught a victim he never released him until the man saw sunrise above a kitchen table, a line to the basement for a winter wash, kitchen implements from a pot scraper, and food pusher to a gas range, and electric washing machine, with the furnace and hardwood floors thrown in. Soon the rip of shoveled shingles, the sound of sawing, and the ring of hammers filled the air. The Hardings' improvements improved so fast that sand, cement, and the big pile of lumber began accumulating at Peter's corner of the crossroads below the home for the playhouse. Men who started by calling Peter a fool ended by borrowing his plans and belaboring themselves for their foolishness, for the neighborhood was slowly awakening and beginning to develop a settled conviction as to what really constituted the joy of life, and that the place to enjoy it was at home, and the time immediately. Peter's reward was not only in renewed happiness for himself and Nancy, for equal to it was his pleasure over the same renewal and homes worthy of the name for many of his lifelong friends. Mickey started on his day to Atwater with joyful anticipation, but he jumped from Douglas's car and ran up the Harding front walk at 3:00, his face anxious. He saw the Harding car at the gate and wondered at Peter sitting dressed for leisure on the veranda. "Got anxious about Lily," he explained. "Out on the lake I thought I heard her call me, and I had the notion she was crying for me. They laughed at me, but I couldn't stand it. Is she asleep as they said she'd be?" Peter opened his lips, but no word came. Mickey slowly turned a ghastly white. Peter reached in his side pocket, drew out a letter, and handed it to the boy. Mickey pulled the sheet from the envelope, still staring at Peter, then glanced at what he held and collapsed on the step. Peter moved beside him, laid a steadying hand across his shoulders, and proved his fear was as great as Mickey's by being unable to speak. At last the boy produced articulate words. "He came?" he marveled. "About 10 this morning," said Peter. "He took her to the hospital?" panted Mickey. "Yes," said Peter. "Why did you let him?" demanded Mickey. That helped Peter. He indicated the letter. "There's your call for him," he said emphatically. "You asked me to adopt her so I could give him orders to go ahead when he came." "Why didn't you telephone me?" asked Mickey. "I did," said Peter. "The woman who answered didn't know where you were, but she said their car had gone to town, so I thought maybe you'd find them there. I was just going to call them again." "Was she afraid?" wavered Mickey. "Yes, I think she was," said Peter. "Did she cry for me?" asked Mickey. "Yes, she did," admitted Peter, who hadn't a social lie in his being. But when he offered to put off the examination till he might come again, she climbed from the cot and made them take her. Ma went with her. "The Sunshine Nurse came?" questioned Mickey. "Yes," said Peter, "and Mrs. Minturn. She sent for him to see about an operation on a child she is trying to save, and when it was over he showed her your letter, so she brought them out in the car, and Ma went back with them." "She may be on that glass table right now," gulped Mickey. "What time is it? When's the next car? Run me to the station, will you? And if you've got any money, let me have it till I get to mine." "Of course," said Peter. "Will Junior and Mary be all right?" asked Mickey, pausing in his extremity to think of others. "Yes, they often stay while we go." "Hurry!" begged Mickey. Peter took hold of the gear and faced straight ahead. "She's oiled, the tank full, and the engine purring like a kitten," he said. "Mickey, I always wanted to beat that trolley just once to show it I could, if it wasn't loaded with women and children. Awful nice road." "Go on," said Mickey. Peter smiled and slid across the starter. "Sit tight," he said tersely. The big car slipped up the road no faster than it had gone frequently, past the station and on and on. Mickey twisted to look back at the rattle of the trolley stopping behind them and watched it with wishful eye. Peter opened his lips and said, "Just warmed up enough and an even start." The trolley came abreast and whistled. Peter blew his horn and glanced that way with a little "come on" forward jerk of his head. The motorman nodded, touched his gear, and the car started. Peter laid prideful, loving hands on his machinery. For the first time, with legitimate racing excuse, as he had long wished to, he tried out his engine. Mickey could see the faces of the protesting passengers and the conductor grinning in the door, but Peter could not have heard if he had tried to tell him. Flying it was, smooth and even past fields, orchards, and houses, past people who cried out at them and shook their fists. Mickey looked at Peter and registered for life each line of his big frame and lineament of his face, as he gripped the gear and put his car over the highway. When they reached the pavement, Mickey touched Peter's arm. "Won't make anything by getting arrested," he cautioned. "No police for blocks yet," said Peter. "Well, there's risk of life and damage suit at each crossing," shouted Mickey, and Peter slowed a degree, but he was miles ahead of all regulations as he stopped before the gleaming entrance. Mickey sprang from the car and hurried up the steps. Mrs. Minturn arose from a seat and came to meet them. "Take me to her, quick!" begged Mickey. Silently she led the way to her suite in her old home, and opened the door. Mickey had a glimpse of Mrs. Harding, his sunshine nurse, and 3 men, one of whom he recognized from reproductions of his features in the papers. A very white, tired-looking Peaches stretched both hands and uttered a shrill cry as Mickey appeared in the doorway. His answer was inarticulate, and his arms spread widely. Then Peaches arose, and in a few shuffling but sustained steps fell on his breast, and gripped him with all her strength. "Oh, darling, you'll kill yourself!" wailed Mickey. He laid her on the davenport and knelt clasping her. Peaches regained self-control first. She sat up, shamelessly wiping Mickey's eyes and her own alternately. "Flowersy girl, did you hurt yourself awful?" "I know something I won't tell," chanted Peaches, as she had been doing for days. Mickey looked at her and then up at Peter, who had entered and come to them. "Did you?" eagerly asked Peter of the child. Peaches nodded proudly. "To meet Mickey," she triumphed. "I wouldn't for anybody else first. The longest piece yet, and it didn't hurt, and I didn't fall." "Good!" shouted Peter. "That's the ticket." "You look here, Miss Chicken, what do you mean?" cried Mickey wonderingly. "Oh, the Dr. Carroll man you sent for came," explained Peaches, "and you wasn't there, but he had your name on the letter you wrote. He showed me, so I came and let him examination me. But Peter and I been standing alone and taking steps when nobody was looking. You've surprised me joyful so much it takes one as big as that to pay you back." Mickey clung to his treasure and turned to Peter an odd, questioning face. "That's it," said Peter. "She's been on her feet for 10 days, or such a matter." Mickey appealed to Dr. Carroll. "How about this?" he demanded. "She's going to walk," said the great man assuringly. "It's all over? You've performed your miracle?" asked Mickey. "Yes," said Dr. Carroll. "It's all over, Mickey, but you had the miracle performed before I saw her, lad." Mickey retreated to Peach's neck again, and she smiled over and comforted him. "Mickey, I knew you'd be crazy," she said. "I knew you'd be glad, but I didn't know you could be so—" Mickey took her in his arms a second, then slowly recovered his feet and a small amount of self-possession. Again he turned to the surgeons. "Are you sure? Will it hurt her? Will it last?" "Quite sure," said Dr. Carroll. "Calm yourself, lad. Her case is not so unusual, only more aggravated than usual. I've examined her from crown to sole, and she's straight and sound. You have started her permanent cure. All you need is to keep on exactly as you are going, and limit her activities, so that in her joy she doesn't overdo and tire herself. You are her doctor. I congratulate you." Dr. Carroll came forward, holding out his hand, and Mickey took it with one of his that was not gripping Peaches, and said, "Ah!" But he was a radiant boy, and the white light on his forehead shone never so brightly. "Thank you, sir," he said. "Thank everybody, but thank you especial over and over. I don't know how I'll ever square up with you, but I'll pay you all I have to start on. I've some money I've saved from my wages, and I'll be working harder and earning more all the time." "But Mickey," protested the surgeon, "you don't owe me anything. I didn't operate. You had the work done before I arrived. I would have come sooner, but I knew she couldn't be operated, even if her case demanded it, until she had gained more strength." He was watching Mickey's face, and he read aright, so he continued, "I liked that suggestion you made in your letter very much. Something coming in steadily is a good thing for any man to have. For the next 3 months, suppose you send me $2 a week you offered me if I'd come. How would that be?" Mickey gathered Peaches in his arms and looked over his shoulder as he started on the homeward trip. "Thank you, sir," he said tersely. "That would be square." The End. End of Chapter 20, and end of the book Michael O'Halloran by Gene Stratton-Porter.